Hey guys, it's me, your new host, Ricardo Longfinger. Ha ha ha. Of course, I'm only kidding. It's me, Madular. See, during the fall season, there's nothing more fun than pretending to be somebody completely different, then reaping the rewards of your hard work by going door to door, collecting fentanyl and razor blades. Of the many spine-tingling masquerades we see come Halloween time, there are none quite so terrifying as a movie pretending to be a video game. Allow me to explain.
The year is 1983. Arcades are a place of kinetic energy, a communal watering hole where a kid walks in with their $10 weekly allowance and walks out a few hours later with an empty wallet, popcorn butter-stained hands still shaking with adrenaline. The high would wear off by the time you got home. You'd sit cross-legged on the living room floor and boot up your Atari 2600. It'd have to do. Not a bad likeness, but hardly a substitute for the real thing. See, arcade games had horsepower. Arcade hardware was powerful, designed on a per-game basis, allowing for cutting-edge graphics and fast, fluid gameplay that you just couldn't get on a home console. The very next day at school, you hear murmurs of a new arcade cabinet to end all others. You run, not walk, to the video arcade, step inside, and are sure that your eyes doth deceive you. What is this, some kind of prank? That's not a game, that's just a cartoon. It's a Don Bluth cartoon stuffed inside an arcade cabinet. And yet, someone is playing it. They're operating the controls, they're feeding it coins, they just got a game over. It is a game. What manner of sorcery makes it look so good? Well, it's no sorcery at all. It's the power of full motion video, or FMV. Arcade cabinets would utilize pre-recorded videos played back via Laserdisc. The more straightforward of these, such as Dragon's Lair, would simply play a video and require a player's input at preset moments. If the player succeeded, the video would continue to play. If they failed, the cabinet would abruptly swap to a short game over video. The birth of QuickTime events, your favorite. More complex games would combine pre-recorded video with real-time 2D graphics. Monitors would display complex backgrounds playing back via Laserdisc, while the gameplay resembled a more traditional arcade experience. It seemed like a major innovation in the world of video games. Being able to play movies was ostensibly the goal of narratively driven games at the time, and with these Laserdisc cabinets, that dream was closer than ever. Yet, for as quickly as they burst onto the arcade scene, they left just as quickly. Why is that? Well, it's because once the novelty had worn off, everybody realized that these games sucked ass. Unfortunately, it seemed that nobody really knew what to do with the tech. Every FMV arcade game seemed to fit in one of a small handful of molds. Repetitive, trial-and-error driven games that only trust fund kids could beat because you needed about $6,000 in quarters just to figure out what to do. Then there were those that played like any other arcade game, but with grainy, interlaced video and imprecise collision detection. The icing on the cake was that most Laserdisc games cost 50 cents to play, double the price of good old reliable Pac-Man. The games were expensive to make, and nobody wanted to play them anymore. For years, the concept of the FMV game would lie dormant. As technology improved, arcade developers would occasionally make forays back into the Laserdisc world. One example of this is Mad Dog McCree, a 1990 light gun shooter that was not positively received, but has weirdly been ported to a ton of different consoles.
It's showdown time, stranger. So holster your iron. We're gonna see how fast you can draw. You'll either be mighty quick or, well, that's why we gotta boot Hill.
Most games of its ilk did not find the same level of irony-based success. FMV gaming's real second chance came during the early 90s with the increasing popularity of the compact disc. FMVs suffered in the context of an arcade due to the limited capacity of a Laserdisc and also just a lack of longevity. There's simply no reason to play through, say, Dragon's Lair once you've beaten it. Well, home computer gaming addressed both of these issues. Interactive movies may not have been suitable for the arcade, but for the home computer they were a great fit. The previous decade had seen the success and serialization of countless iconic horror movies. Evil Dead, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street. While flicks like these would begin to fall out of favor throughout the 1990s, the popularity of video games like Namco's Splatterhouse, Konami's Castlevania, and Lucasfilm Games' Maniac Mansion proved there was still a lingering hunger for horror. Combining the thrills of a horror movie with the world of interactive fiction just seems like a no-brainer.
Nowadays, the idea of FMV, it's a bit of a laughingstock, the medium of choice for many of history's most unintentionally hilarious games. A mechanically restrictive game style that looks every bit its age and more. But for one moment, it was believed to be the future. Today we'll be taking a look at this brief window in gaming history, where the world of horror movies and the world of horror games gingerly touched tips, then went their separate ways. Now, we won't be covering every FMV horror game, if for no other reason than I've already covered a whole bunch of them on my channel. So, check out my channel if you want more. That said, let's jump into the macabre world of FMV horror games. Now, for our purposes, I'm mostly interested in a game that marries the full motion video with the presence of real-life actors. I think that's where a lot of the buried treasure is. One word of warning. The video games we'll be looking at today contain subject matter of a potentially disturbing nature. You might not believe me when a game looks like this, but there are some topics of a violent or sexual nature, and occasionally a mixture of both. It's a weird time for Sierra Online. If you're sensitive to such things, be aware, I won't shy away from talking about these games as they were presented back in the 1990s. Now, nothing particularly bad will be shown. This is YouTube after all, the platform whose bread and butter is the children of absentee parents. But the topics of discussion and gratuitously cheesy slasher movie violence may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised.
Of all the games we'll be talking about today, none sparked a reaction quite like Digital Pictures' Night Trap. The story of Night Trap actually begins on an unreleased console called the Control Vision. Rather than cartridges or discs, Hasbro's Control Vision would use VHS tapes, multiple tapes running concurrently. This would provide a movie-like experience with limited interactivity on the player's part. A proof of concept was developed for the Control Vision titled Scene of the Crime. Using its proprietary Insta-Switch technology, the player would observe different rooms in a house as a crime took place. A live feed of each room would be available, allowing you to actively switch as events took place in real time.
Norman! Francis and I were just admiring your new house.
Thank you, John.
Here you'd eavesdrop on conversations, witness confrontations, and ultimately point out the perpetrator based on the information you've collected, not unlike a cinematic little game of Clue. It was a novel idea, but would it be enough to carry an entire game console? I suspect no, but we'll never truly have the answer to that question. Due to inflated hardware pricing, the Control Vision was deemed too risky an investment for Hasbro. It was quietly cancelled, but not before two games had been produced for the console, Sewer Shark and Night Trap, both of which were now homeless. It was 1989, and no cartridge-based system would be able to handle FMV playback. The NES could barely handle the words "I'm bad" without exploding. I'm bad. It was around this time that Sega announced their forthcoming Sega CD. This add-on accessory for the Genesis would allow for CD-ROM-based games to be played. This was a huge deal back in the day. CDs had way more storage space than cartridges, promising video playback, Redbook audio, and just more ambitious experiences. At last, Night Trap, the production of which was simply too expensive to consider axing, had a new home. Released in October of 1992, Night Trap follows closely in the steps of Scene of the Crime. You're working with the Sega Control Attack Team, or SCAT for short, unfortunately.
I'm Sims, SCAT Team Commander, SCAT Mission 230.
A family of vampires has populated their winery estate with traps so that they can harvest the blood of the innocent. The SCAT has managed to hack into the house's security system, giving us live feeds of every room as well as access to those traps. The vampire daughter has invited her friends for a sleepover, including an undercover SCAT agent named Kelly, played by the late Dana Plato. It's up to us to switch between the 8 different house feeds, keeping the girls safe from these astonishingly incompetent vampire henchmen known as augurs. Effectively, what you've got is a low-rent 80s horror movie where you can occasionally activate the most boneheaded traps I've ever seen. They all just open up a wall. Or open up a floor. Or open up a wall while the other wall pushes the auger into the open part of the wall. Obviously, the quality of the FMVs was pretty rough, and this is with the 32X attachment. They're even worse if you only have a Sega CD. Thankfully, for some sick reason, the game was actually re-released a few years ago by Screaming Villains as a 25th anniversary remaster. It looks like they got a hold of the original VHS masters, so this is a surprisingly nice work of preservation, and it's also the version that I'll be playing. The biggest gameplay difference between this version and the older version is the camera thumbnails. The 8 rooms are displayed at the bottom of the screen, but in the original game these are just icons. In practice, this means you have to constantly flip through every camera just to see what's happening.
Set them down anywhere, girls. This is a beautiful house, Mrs. Warren. Oh, please, just call me Sheila. Is this the freezer?
The remaster turns the icons into live feeds in themselves, so you have a general idea of what's happening in all rooms at any given time. This is a much appreciated add-on because the icons were a fundamental flaw with the original, obviously a result of technical limitations. Let me put it like this. The videos they shot are so ridiculously cheesy that you almost can't look away, but if you want to keep on playing, you have to look away. You've got to be switching cameras constantly. If you see an auger, then you have to trap them quickly, then switch to the next camera. If you don't trap them, then you definitely have to switch to the next camera because there's a good chance that an auger is skulking around in another room already. They try to alleviate the guesswork by adding this ridiculous musical sting that plays whenever an auger is on screen. You know, it's just there to let you know something's happening on this camera. It's pretty limited in its usefulness though. The window of opportunity you have to flip to the right camera, then watch and trap an auger is like 4 or 5 seconds. If you miss too many augers, you get a game over and you have to restart.
It was your job to protect Kelly and the rest of those girls. But from what I've just seen, the place is being overrun.
In short, the game would be impossible to beat on your first attempt if you didn't know exactly where and when the augers were going to pop up. Thus, what you're supposed to do is replay Night Trap over and over and over again. Sounds like a real scream, doesn't it? There's a timer on screen for a reason. When you see an auger, you're supposed to make a mental or actual note of the place and time. They never deviate from their preset schedule, so as long as you slowly learn where and when to expect the augers, you'll hypothetically make it a bit further each time. Imagine you're watching A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm standing next to the TV. Every 10 seconds I ask you to guess a number I'm thinking of between 1 and 8. If you get it right, the movie continues. If you get it wrong, you get a strike. After 3 strikes, me and you have to rewind the tape and start watching the movie from the beginning again. Does that sound like a fun time to you? Or does it sound like the worst time? Herein lies the big problem with Night Trap. The movie sequences, they're pretty entertaining. Don't get me wrong, they're not good, but they're saturated in enough late 80s camp to be a fun watch. Only it's not fun to watch the first few minutes of them 85 times while frequently writing down times and locations. That variability that makes replaying arcade games interesting is completely lacking here. I'm getting so sick of watching these characters have the same conversation for the umpteenth time. But the thing is, until the auger starts showing up, there's nothing else to watch. What am I going to do? Switch the feed over to the bathroom and just watch in silence for 2 minutes? Why don't they have a toilet? So the new live feed thumbnails really help ease the pain, but it's still not a perfect solution. Oftentimes your view of threats will be obscured, such as with the driveway cam, which is just too dark to make anything out. Other times you need an unreasonably quick trigger finger to capture an AUG, then switch to another room and capture another. They may walk like bumbling idiots, but they move quick, and once you start having to play catch-up, you might as well give up because it's already over. The game has another equal and opposite problem to the replayability issue. Like I said, a lot of these videos are really entertaining and you want nothing more than to linger and watch them, but you constantly have to be switching cameras. So you end up missing a lot of entertaining scenes, since just hanging out and watching them can cost you the game.
You are a very special boy. We both know that.
I'd love to learn more about Special Boy Tony, but unfortunately I have to go man a wacky system of levers and pulleys for the next half hour. Failure often results in some pretty ridiculous scenes too. The augurs are just so non-threatening. Watching these girls scream in horror as they do this poopy pants shuffle down the hallway always gets a chuckle out of me. Maybe if the family invested in a toilet, they wouldn't have to dump ass in their boiler suits. The game also borders on slapstick comedy, not just the traps, but the fact that there are 100 augurs over the course of the game and nobody notices the majority of them. They're not exactly low-profile home intruders, yet somehow the house guests just keep missing them. It's so beyond stupid. One very small bit, and frankly kind of obnoxious bit of variability in the game, is the current security color. Every so often, the homeowners will retreat to the basement to change the alarm color, which forces you to swap your own access level. The thing is, you have to be in the room when they announce the security change, or else you won't know what color to switch to. They recorded some very obvious ADR to be placed over top of the movies so it can change between playthroughs.
Not that again.
No, not that again.
Come on, Studley, we better change that code.
How about orange?
Sure.
Oh, just a standard conversation here, being delivered in an unsuspicious cadence. If you miss these conversations, the traps stop working until you correctly guess the new security color, so you'll probably miss a few augs in the meantime. As the game progresses, the girls become aware of the vampiric homeowners, and the scat agents start making their way inside. Again, it's so distracting, there's so much cockamamie shit going on, but no, you have to be switching to the bedroom, make sure there's no augurs. You can accidentally capture allies at times, which is an automatic game over. Thankfully, there is a single checkpoint in Night Trap, right at the point where you'd have to insert the second disc in the Sega CD version. Ultimately, the vampires are defeated and Scat emerges victorious.
Thanks, Control, you just saved my life. And you were very good. You saved all my friends, trapped most of the Augs. I'll bet with a little practice you could be perfect.
That's all there really is to say about Night Trap. So what exactly is this game's legacy? Well, it reviewed somewhat positively when it was first released. In fact, GamePro gave it a nearly perfect score, making it marginally better than Seal of the Pharaoh. Some critics saw through the veneer, but the positivity was most likely due to the excitement of seeing an interactive split-screen horror movie. And you know what, that's fair enough, it is kind of an interesting and non-traditional idea for this medium. There is some fun to be had in Night Trap, it just wears out its welcome really quickly. Nonetheless, the game became something of a cult hit over the years, developing a reputation as the quintessential so-bad-it's-good experience. Still, that hardly explains the legacy that Night Trap left behind. You'd think a game like this would come and go without many people taking notice, but you'd be wrong. Not only did Night Trap not come and go, but it also caused a shitstorm so severe that the United States Senate got involved. The developers of Night Trap unwittingly played a key role in changing the video game industry. The year was 1993. Mortal Kombat, a popular and violent new fighting game, was coming to home consoles. Nintendo, being a family-friendly company, removed any hint of blood or gore for the game's release on the SNES. Sega made the blood and gore accessible only via parental password. Enter Joe Lieberman, a US senator from the state of Connecticut, heard tell of Sega's depraved and anti-family vision for the future of video games. He wiggled his fingers high in the air. "A moral crusade for me to lead?" he said. "Don't mind if I do." Alright, that didn't happen, but you can pretty much imagine what it would be like if it did. On December 9th, 1993, a Senate hearing on the evils of violent video games was held. At the center of the hearing were a small handful of games: Mortal Kombat, Lethal Enforcers, and yes, Night Trap. Here's the thing, nothing happens in Night Trap. It is the tamest horror movie there is. There's no nudity, there's no blood, there's only implied violence. The violence occurring on screen is considerably less graphic than Home Alone 2. The biggest point of contention, and really the only point of contention, was a single scene that occurs if the player fails. A woman in a nightie, oh man, I'm feeling weird pee-pee feelings already just playing this game, has a collar placed around her, and she's dragged away. The collar is implied to be taking her blood, although again, you don't see blood, you don't see anything really. But hey, why let the pesky details ruin a good witch hunt? Not only was the game's level of violence dishonestly portrayed, but Senator Byron Dorgan stated that the goal of Night Trap is to trap and kill women.
About 2 months ago, I saw the video game Night Trap for the first time. It is a sick, disgusting video game in my judgment. It's an effort to trap and kill women.
Which just isn't true. A cursory glance at the manual would show that this is not true. They had expert testimonies claiming to have seen ample evidence to support the link between video games and real-world violence. Slippery slope fallacies were presented as fact, and baseless assertions of misogyny were made. Basically, a group of people got in front of cameras and just lied to the American people for several hours. One of the funniest things about the hearing is that Nintendo of America's president, Howard Lincoln, was asked to speak. He basically used the hearing as an opportunity to kiss ass and do some free holiday advertising for Nintendo.
Certainly the industry is moving into different territory with new technology. Nintendo, for example, is going to be coming out with a 64-bit system in the future. But
you sneaky little twerp. Now you might be thinking, if they had all these literal nobodies masquerading as experts and they had Howard presenting a 2-hour-long Nintendo commercial to the Senate, surely they had the developers of Night Trap present to, at the very least, defend themselves from the allegations. Nope. The developers arrived, prepared to speak, and were told that there simply wasn't going to be enough time. Now, in the wake of this Senate hearing, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or ESRB, would be established. No innocent child's eyes would ever be assailed by the vicious sights and sounds of Night Trap again. Parents could once again rest easy, knowing that they wouldn't have to periodically take interest in their children's lives. More than 30 years later, the ESRB may not be able to stop kids from gambling, but at least they don't have to see a woman's shoulders anymore. In all seriousness, the ESRB was probably the best outcome. If some kind of ratings board was going to be inevitable, it would best be left in the hands of pretty much anybody other than these people. Besides, if any publicity is good publicity, then Night Trap could really have only benefited from these Senate hearings. The game had launched on the Sega CD, a system that 13 people owned. But I mean, hey, after hearing Mr. Lieberman talking about all these sexy death scenes, you kinda have to buy it out of sheer curiosity. It was ported to other systems and ended up selling 400,000 copies throughout the 90s, ultimately becoming the fondly remembered cult hit that it is today.
And let me say that for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system.
Guess again, fucker. Does it deserve all of this hubbub? As a self-contained experience, probably not. But sometimes the story of a game is where the real treasure is. This simple game was rescued from obscurity, given a chance to stir up some controversy, and lay the foundation for the coming age of home console FMV games. For better or for worse.
Has the CD-ROM finally come of age?
Now, for those wondering how the CD-ROM managed to just thrash the floppy disk into oblivion with such extreme prejudice, I got one word for you: missed. Yeah, you misspelled, missed, pal. It's got an I.
I'd like to play this game.
Missed with a Y was a big deal. Why was it such a big deal? Well, it's because the game was just unbelievably immersive for its time. Movement around its world involved a combination of pre-rendered 3D still images and transitory full-motion videos. This combination of elements wasn't unheard of, but many consider Myst to be the moment it was perfected. The game was not real-time 3D, but the illusion was so convincing and the level of detail so impressive that it really didn't matter. The puzzles were mostly well-designed, but more importantly, the presentation redefined the adventure game genre. Myst would become the standard for years to come.
While Myst has been soaking up the residual glory over all these years, it actually has a sister game, which is arguably as important in many of the same ways, but for some reason or another hasn't really enjoyed the same influential status in gaming history. I'm talking about Trilobite Games' The Seventh Guest.
The Seventh Guest is a horror adventure game, one of the earliest PC games available on CD, and arguably the earliest point where CD-ROMs started becoming appealing to gamers. When talking about this specific style of FMV-heavy adventure game, typically Myst is seen as a progenitor, but Seventh Guest actually predates Myst by 4 months or so. The game is styled similarly, but with a much heavier emphasis on horror of the schlocky variety. I think these early live-action sequences are just inherently schlock, but we love schlock, we're big schlockers here on this channel. If you manage to successfully install a CD-ROM drive in your computer after wrestling with it for 12 hours, the introduction of Seventh Guest would have been quite a reward. You would have never heard such high-quality music coming from a computer game in all your days, not to mention the detailed graphics and voiceover. The intro tells us of Henry Stoff, a vagabond who once murdered a woman just to steal her purse. He began carving dolls and selling them. Then he started carving other things too, and selling them also. Then everybody who owned his things died. Then he went into the spooky mansion, and that's where the game begins. According to the developers, Trilobite was inspired by the game Clue, and that's evident in the designs of its characters, or the ghosts of its characters. This looks silly now, but again, this would have been mind-blowing back in the early 90s, to see real human beings at such a high level of graphical detail. The line between movies and games was truly blurred here for the first time, and it really seemed like the sky was the limit. So this house has seen 6 guests so far, and you are the 7th, hence the name. You're meant to piece together the events that occurred in the mansion as ghostly apparitions converse with one another, occasionally acknowledging your presence. The meat of the game is its puzzle solving. Almost every room in this mansion features some kind of puzzle, denoted by your cursor turning into this brain skull. You know, what is it with FMV adventure games and having skeleton cursors? Anyway, I digress. The puzzles were somewhat non-traditional for the genre. Instead of accumulating an inventory full of crap and haplessly combining items to progress, these are mostly logic puzzles. They test your ability to survey and identify the problem. The solution is usually within the language of the puzzle itself, so to speak, rather than in the form of an item tucked away somewhere. Now, the atmosphere of Seventh Guest is simply classic. The Haunted Mansion vibe is playful, but with enough spookiness to leave a lasting impression in the mind of a young person playing it. The music is also great. There are some nice original compositions that take advantage of the CD's increased storage, and even the silly little MIDI tunes really suit the game. The Seventh Guest's weaknesses really begin with the puzzles. Some of them are easy to understand, such as this sliding vent puzzle, or another where you've got to shut every coffin in a room. Other times it's really difficult to interpret the signal through the noise. Solutions often feel pretty damn obscure despite small environmental hints. Some puzzles feel just short of impossible without a guide, and the developers seem to recognize that because the game allows you to skip puzzles if you're having enough trouble with them. Some of the puzzles are just plain annoying. One of them is literally just a 3D maze, a premise so boring that it could only ever work as a screensaver. After completing a puzzle, you'll always be rewarded with another ridiculous FMV scene, with hammy acting and very silly special effects. It's entertaining, but the premise for the story is pretty thin, so it doesn't really keep your attention for long. Even though the plot of The Seventh Guest is really nothing to write home about, I have to send some respect by way of its writer, Matthew Costello. Costello was a dyed-in-the-wool novelist who would have been in his mid-40s by the time The Seventh Guest was in development. Video games had very little mainstream legitimacy as a storytelling medium, much less as art. So for a professional writer to identify the potential within the medium shows an open mind and a pioneering spirit that I very much respect. People have claimed over the years that Seventh Guest and Myst were harbingers of the end times for adventure games, that they killed the genre. On one hand, that's just categorically false. Both of these games sold millions of copies, a massive level of success for a point-and-click adventure. On the other hand, I can kind of understand what this point of view is driving at. Seventh Guest takes a very different approach to puzzle solving. You wander around the house all by your lonesome, solving a puzzle, then moving on to the next. The components that make an adventure game rich and memorable to me are missing here. Having the opportunity to interact with a colorful cast of characters, placing emphasis on exploration, rewarding the player's curiosity, and having the player excitedly identify solutions to problems that have been nagging at them for many hours. Seventh Guest doesn't really hit any of those beats for me, and while a game like Myst is missing character interactions, it takes advantage of that loneliness to create an imaginative and immersive game world. That's why I think, despite both games being commercial hits, Myst is still frequently talked about. There's nothing like Myst, other than arguably its own sequels. The adventure game died because it couldn't keep pace with changing markets and player tastes. After the initial shock of CD quality presentation wore off, we were left with the reality that this genre had kind of stagnated over the past decade. In an attempt to capitalize on the Seventh Guest's success, Trilobite released a sequel in 1995 titled The 11th Hour. With 3 years of FMV puzzle games having passed in the interim, critics were much harder on this game, even though it was an improvement over its predecessor. As a result, the game's sales numbers were only a fraction of the Seventh Guest's. While the games may not hold up to scrutiny quite the way Myst and Riven do, Seventh Guest is still memorable, giving us a glimpse into what felt at the time like the future of interactive entertainment.
The success of these puzzle games gave rise to a bit of a movement in the early 1990s. First-person adventure games with an emphasis on pre-rendered backgrounds and full-motion video, better known as Myst clones.
Many of these clones were substandard, imitating without understanding. Some fared quite a bit better, displaying higher levels of creativity and ambition. Some were just plain bizarre. I'll tell you this much, when a restaurant uses papyrus font, their tikka masala is going to be excellent. When a video game uses papyrus font, it is going to suck. Frankenstein, Through the Eyes of the Monster was released in 1995, developed by Amazing Media and published by Interplay. You play as Philip, a man wrongfully charged and sentenced to death for murdering his own daughter. He's then mysteriously brought back to life by a mad scientist. Within the castle of this Dr. Frankenstein, you must piece together what happened to you, all while solving puzzles and avoiding imminent danger. The gameplay is quite simple. Rather than having FMVs play every time you move or change your perspective, the game is comprised of still frames that allow you to move instantaneously, which frankly I'd appreciate. It's pretty standard as Myst clones go. The game does have some nice atmosphere. Frankenstein's castle is moody, largely thanks to some crisp, high-quality renders, great lighting, and a nice soundtrack. The game's take on Mary Shelley's work is also a little darker and aimed at an older audience than you might expect. The puzzles are pretty run-of-the-mill with some light item collection and a major focus on exploration. Unfortunately, the castle is a maze. Many hallways and rooms resemble one another, making it difficult to know where you're going and where you've been. There are lots of secret passages and routes to different levels of the castle, so you'll be relying on a lot of insignificant details as landmarks to help you navigate. So the puzzles are okay, and the exploration is mediocre, if slightly frustrating. Why am I even talking about this game? It seems like there's nothing to say, right? Well, there is one thing about Frankenstein, Through the Eyes of the Monster, that is worth mentioning.
The servants have set up a room for you on the lower level. Please make yourself at home. A word of caution. Though you have had a serious concussion, to say the least, if you were to fall asleep, well, it would probably be fatal. Of course, dying itself is not a problem, but the hemorrhaging, it could cause more damage to your brain.
The game stars Tim fucking Curry. Tim Curry plays Dr. Frankenstein, and he chews the scenery with as much zeal as anyone could ever hope for.
Perhaps the cat's got your tongue. You've no idea how close to the truth that statement is.
Like Frankenstein's monster, his mere presence and charisma alone are electrifying enough to give this flatlined experience the gift of life.
The villagers fell upon you like a pack of hungry wolves, tearing you limb from limb. Not your lucky day. Luckily, I had some spare parts that I used as replacements. After all, parts is parts. Thank God.
I cannot think of a better casting choice for the good doctor. Now, don't get it twisted. Amazing Media probably didn't have a grand budget for this game, so Mr. Curry's involvement in the story is somewhat limited. You'll wander around, and every so often, if you said your prayers and ate your Flintstones vitamins, Dr. Frankenstein will show up to talk about how awesome he is and how much you suck.
You look confused. Actually, you look dazed, but dazed is good. It's still early for you, Philip.
So, the question becomes, is it worth suffering through a truly mediocre game, spending hours lost and helpless just for the pleasure of occasionally, briefly watching Tim Curry go to town in front of a green screen? The fact that this is even a question actually speaks to how smart this casting choice was.
The meal was quite good. Too bad you missed it.
The answer, if you want to be objective about it, is no. The game is not very good on a mechanical level, but Tim certainly sweetens the value proposition. Like Matthew Costello writing the script for The Seventh Guest, Tim Curry stepped out of his comfort zone to try a totally different medium. Would you believe me if I told you this is one of several games Tim Curry was involved with at the time? I mean, yeah, a paycheck is a paycheck, but he's not phoning it in. He's treating this game like it's an actual project worth its salt. I appreciate that. No matter what he was working on, it always seemed like he had a blast doing it, and that energy is just infectious.
A limousine and a pizza. Compliments of the Plaza Hotel.
Amazing Media, misnomer notwithstanding, were very lucky to have their hands in the Interplay cookie jar. Thanks to their resources, they were able to find the one thing that could rescue their adventure game from obscurity.
Space!
Point-and-click adventure games seemed like a natural fit for the world of FMV. Given the restrictive nature of video playback, the only sensible choice would be an equally restrictive genre of game. The kind of game where a player only ever succeeds or fails, moves forward, or remains stagnant, like a game of hopscotch. More and more often, developers were finding ways to incorporate FMV into their games rather than relying on it wholesale. Many Philips CDI games were developed with this principle in mind. Take advantage of the CD technology, throw plenty of FMVs in there to justify the outrageous price tag of the console, and then bury a standard game underneath it all. And the word standard here might be charitable. FMV seemed like a pretty good fit for light gun shooters, which rely on predetermined pathways and predictable enemy placements. The market was being flooded with CD-powered consoles at this time, such as the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer, Jaguar CD, and the forthcoming release of the Sega Saturn. This gave way to a rash of FMV light gun shooters, marrying the limitations of video with those of the genre itself. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, but mostly it was the worst of times. Few of these games are quite as groan-inducing as Digital Pictures' Corpse Killer. Yes, Digital Pictures, the same company that produced Night Trap. You can't accuse them of stagnating, and no more than you can accuse them of producing a quality game. Corpse Killer is a somewhat legendarily bad rail shooter, and one that also received a re-release, which is even more inexplicable to me than Night Trap having one. You play as a Marine airdropped onto an island. An evil professor has unleashed a zombie virus, so we have to stop him and end his reign of terror. This is an extremely cutscene-heavy game, to the point where the actual gameplay comprises like less than half of the time you spend playing Corpse Killer. Upon arriving at the island, you meet a reporter named Julie and a driver named Winston, whose fake dreads look a lot more convincing when you're playing the game in 320 by 224 resolution.
Welcome to hell, sucker!
The people who made this game watched Day of the Dead, and the only lesson they took away from it was, give black guy fake Jamaican accent. Perfect.
We've been punished by the Creator.
It's too bad. They should have learned all kinds of lessons from Day of the Dead. It's one of the best zombie movies ever made. Claustrophobic setting, entertaining cast of characters, some of the best practical effects ever put to film. Most importantly, the zombies in that movie are intimidating, even in their slowness. At no point during Day of the Dead do zombies start walking through thin air and flying towards the screen. They don't mug for the camera with pancake makeup on or wear dollar store skeleton Halloween costumes. Anyway, I'm really just stalling for time here. Let's get back to Corpse Killer. Is that a wallet chain? Just when you think the zombies can't get less intimidating, apparently they listen to Korn. Corpse Killer is a very bad light gun shooter. Enemy variety is almost non-existent, weapons are boring, and they didn't give a single fuck about any kind of spatial congruence when they designed the levels. Zombies just fly through the air with no explanation. There's no depth or proper scaling or anything. Sometimes it's impossible to kill them before they hit you, so the game just gives you tons of health. In one level, I missed pretty much every single enemy and still managed to move on.
Good shooting, brah.
That's not true. Stop gassing me up, Winston. I will say there is some mild entertainment value in the cutscenes. They're poorly acted, but with a script like this, I mean, what is an actor supposed to do anyway?
Lieutenant's coming back for us. And he's coming back for you too, Hellman, you stinking piece of crap. Lieutenant, he's something else.
Some of the effects, the lighting, the shot composition shows a slightly higher degree of care and competence than many other FMV games. But in a counterintuitive way, that's sort of the worst possible outcome. If the cutscenes were out and out horrible, the game would probably have more staying power, but the middle ground of competency makes them forgettable, and that's just the cardinal sin of an FMV game. You want a cheesy zombie light gun shooter that can be beaten in a sitting? Play the House of the Dead games, they're infinitely better. The encounters are more fun, the level design is better. Actually, the fact that the levels are designed at all is an improvement, and the game brings your mood up because it's so much fun to play. Corpse Killer? Acting is lame, action is tame, explicitly dull, excitement annulled. I cannot recommend it.
Corpse Killer was released right around the time where FMV was starting to fall out of favor. The very same graphics that had people oohing and eyeing just a few years prior was now eliciting laughter. That said, the FMV format wouldn't be put out to pasture without a fight.
By the mid-90s, Sierra Online was crushing the PC gaming business. The continued success of the development and publishing giant seemed to be ever expanding, and that was at least partially because Sierra was always on the bleeding edge. From sound cards to voice acting to super VGA graphics, they blazed a trail in 90s PC gaming. Ken Williams handled business, while his wife Roberta pursued her creative impulses. Roberta's hands had long been full as a writer, designer, and director of the King's Quest series. She was known for her light-hearted fairy tale storytelling, and she would suffer this reputation no longer. Roberta had spent much of the late 80s and early 90s with the burning desire to make a horror game, one that could take advantage of CD technology to depict real actors in real situations. She wanted it to be dark, disturbing, and unapologetically violent. None of this kid stuff you'd see in games like The Seventh Guest. She wanted Sierra's fans to have nightmares over this game. The script for this game ended up being 550 pages long, and the intended visual design would necessitate storyboarding, actors, directors, a soundstage, the whole shebang. Backgrounds would be rendered using Silicon Graphics workstations, the same kind that had created the special effects in films like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2. It would be a tremendous undertaking, and it famously resulted in production costs of over $4 million, which, when it comes to the game developer big leagues, is chump change now, but that was basically unprecedented for a PC game at the time. The production was arduous, long work days and long work weeks, resulting in hundreds of hours of footage which had to be chopped up and edited down. Sierra built their own soundstage in hopes of using it for many years and many games to come. Complicated prosthetics had to be shot and combined with digital effects to create the gruesome scenes that would be used in the game. After several years, several $1 million, and several delays, hype was peaking. On August 24th of 1995, Sierra Online released Phantasmagoria. It was Sierra's best-selling PC game to date, and if any adventure game lover had been holding out on buying a CD-ROM drive, this game would be the catalyst to change that. Despite the excellent sales, reviews were not nearly so positive. While critics praised the production values of the game, many found the core of Phantasmagoria to be lacking. Whatever its problems may have been, the game had no trouble finding an audience, and many still hold Phantasmagoria in high regard. Did this game warrant its fever pitch of hype, or do its promises of adventure game excellence ring hollow? Well, let's take a look. The game begins with a nightmarish sequence of shocking visuals. Pillars, a face, curtains. Dear Lord, is that a room divider? I think I'm gonna be sick. It all turns out to be the nightmare of our protagonist, Adrian, who wakes up beside her husband, Dawn. You know what I like to do when I wake up from a nightmare? Some serious fucking.
Are you winning, son? Hey! What the HE double hockey sticks is going on here? Oy!
The next morning, we join Adrian and Dawn in their kitchen.
Morning, honey.
Good morning, sweetheart.
How about some coffee?
Yeah, big one.
Big one? That's a weird response to someone asking if you want coffee. If you said big one at Starbucks, I reckon they'd shoot you in the mouth. The couple have recently moved into an old mansion near the small town of Nippawamset, Massachusetts. As if living in a creepy old mansion wasn't enough, Adrian is married to Leo from Twin Peaks, which is usually not a good sign, ladies.
You remember this?
Yeah, I gave you this for Halloween.
You rat? You know it was Christmas Eve. It was the night you proposed to me.
The unintended side effect of their utter lack of chemistry is that you immediately get the sense that something isn't quite right here. This probably wouldn't be ideal if it were a romantic comedy, but hey, this is an FMV horror game, so I think it works. Oh, as the game started, I thought I was watching a movie. The CD technology really is something special. So this being the first full day that they've moved in, we take control of Adrian as she explores the grounds, giving us a sense of where we'll be for the bulk of the game. The house was previously owned by a magician named Zoltan Karnavash, so it's become known as the Carno Mansion to locals. In a very Stephen King-esque setup, Adrian is a writer who's hoping these surroundings and a newfound solitude will give her inspiration for her next thriller novel. Dawn is a photographer and thus spends most of his time retrofitting an upstairs room to be a photo lab. While all of the actors have been digitized, the environments in-game were rendered using SGI workstations. This gave the designers the ability to establish some more creative camera angles, control lighting, and overall it just gives the house a stronger sense of scale and spaciousness. There's a sort of dark yet playful Tim Burton style melded with realism, an intentionality in how shadows cascade across rooms, as well as the materials used to construct walls, floors, and all the furniture in the mansion. It's a pretty distinctive looking game, and there were challenges in building it. Nearly everything that isn't an actor is a pre-rendered model. This means that environments and objects would need to be meticulously built to match the movements and actions of the actor. It leads to some oddness in scale occasionally, such as this bar counter, which is about half the size of Adrian when she's kneeling, and suddenly almost as tall as her when the camera angle changes. When she's interacting with objects like barrels in the cellar, there's a slight mismatch in every minor movement.
Oh, it's dusty.
I kind of dig it, but as an amateur editor, I shudder to imagine how much work it was to build every screen in this game, then keyframe these FMV sequences to match the movements of the actors. The first in-game day here is pretty relaxed, the calm before the storm, if you will. Lots of looking at things, lots of standing very still. Most point-and-click games at the time allowed you some degree of freedom in movement. You could usually have your character walking around the screen at your discretion, but that's not the case here. One of the big selling points of Phantasmagoria is that the game is majorly simplified compared to most adventure games. As a matter of fact, the whole game is mouse-driven. If there's somewhere Adrian can move, an item she can pick up, or something for her to remark on, you'll be able to click on it. In effect, this game was made to appeal to as broad an audience as possible within the horror niche. You cruise your cursor around the screen, waiting for it to turn red, signifying you've found something you can interact with. Don't mind me, just warming my hands by the 18-foot wide fireplace. The style of gameplay is funny because it just makes Adrian kind of look like a dope. She walks around staring at everything, struggling to perform basic tasks. In the pantry, you find a trapdoor that leads to the basement. In order to use it, you have to turn the light on, then use a poker from the fireplace to pry the door open. But because progression is based on cinematic scenes, it's easy to accidentally click on the wrong sector of the screen and do the wrong thing. Like walking into the pantry and then just immediately leaving, but not before the game forces you to turn the light off on your way out. Hey, get back in the closet. What do you think this is, Phantasmagoria 2? As a result of the streamlined interface, the puzzles in this game are real simple, for the most part. There are a few cases of moon logic, but the game is surprisingly straightforward, given Sierra's usual penchant for, well, horse shit. There's even this little skull at the bottom of the screen that gives you hints if you need them.
Ask me for a hint if you are hopelessly stuck, but use me sparingly. Too many hints can spoil the game.
I'll be honest, I half expected it to just say, call Sierra's hint line for $1 a minute or consult the in-game manual for instructions on how to order the official Phantasmagoria walkthrough. Nope, it actually gives you hints, a limited number of them, but hints nonetheless. I can hardly believe this is a 90s adventure game. So Adrian seems really surprised and taken aback by pretty much everything in this house. The fortune teller machine that spits out ominous predictions every day, the various locked doors around the mansion that the owners inexplicably don't have the keys for, the player piano, the antique bottles of liquor. Dawn and Adrian are definitely from the Mike Dawson school of buying old mansions without knowing anything about them.
That's a chilly draft blowing through this decrepit old living room. Some of these windows need to have the glass replaced. This place is a shambles.
It's while we're exploring the upstairs bedrooms that things start getting pretty weird.
Honey, you okay?
Oh, God. The bed.
What?
The bed grabbed me.
The bed grabbed you?
Yes.
Oh.
Classic case of hysterical woman syndrome. I've seen it 1,000 times. Exploring the rest of the mansion, it just gets weirder and weirder. There's a room just packed to the gills with oddities, a massive conservatory, a nursery with a scary picture of a baby on the wall, and a stink cloud hovering above a giant crib. My biggest question at this point is, why did this childless couple buy a house with 400 bedrooms? Don spends most of his time working in the dark room, and with no way to pass the time, Adrian decides to just ruin his day.
When's the photo lab going to be finished?
Oh, probably 2-3 more days, maybe. Oops. Adrian, be careful. That lamp is not secure yet.
Ew. Is the sink still clogged? Hi, honey.
Oh!
Don?
Adrian, honey, will you let me work, please?
Adrian, I can do this better myself, please.
Okay, jeez.
I mean, to be fair, she does suck. Fix the sink, clean the gutters, deal with the poison cloud in the nursery. Can't you just enjoy our enormous pre-rendered house without nagging? With a bunch of locked doors and other peculiarities in the house, Adrian heads to the nearby town of Nipawamset to speak with their real estate agent. What a terrible parking spot. You know, when I worked at the gas station, there was always one type of person who'd park right at the pumps and then walk in with no urgency whatsoever, buying Scratch Lotto and like Diet Dr. Pepper or something. And I gotta tell you, Adrian fits the profile to a T. Calling this a town might be a bit generous. It's like 3 buildings and a lighthouse you can't enter. So Adrian heads in to meet with Bob Tompkins.
Yeah, are you Bob Tompkins?
When's the last time I took a look?
My husband bought a house from you.
Too bad you got a husband, honey.
The only sexually perverted Italian real estate mogul operating out of Nipawamset at your service.
Well, young lady, unless there's something else, I think we'll cut this chit-chat for today. I got a lot of work to do. I got another client I'm going to meet.
Another client? This town has a population of 4. Adrian finds one of the keys to the Carnavash estate left behind.
Aha. Carnavash estate.
So's I forgot the comically oversized key in the filing cabinet. Happens to the best of us, toots. Oversized key in hand, we can access the secret library, which gives us a bit of insight behind Carno and the type of man he was. This is sort of the loop of Phantasmagoria. Every day, you're given a bit of time to explore, talk to the locals, and figure out who Carnavash was, then uncover the dark mysteries of the house. For instance, Adrian finds a secret passageway in the library that leads to a chapel. Inside, she finds a massive tome and a mysterious box which, once opened, releases a spirit somewhere inside the house. A spirit that immediately finds a host.
Don?
I'm not really very hungry. Maybe some tuna or a salad.
Can of tuna is the doctor's recommended choice for a post-possession, post-concussion recovery meal. The next morning, Adrian is sitting in her bedroom working on her novel when Dawn shows up.
What are you doing?
Well, I'm starting my new book.
So what?
So what? So what?
So after being possessed, Dawn turns into an insufferable asshole.
Don't be coy with me. I asked you several times to go buy me drain cleaner. Now, did you do it?
I know you said the sink was clogged in your darkroom, but you never asked me to go get you any drain cleaner. I would have remembered something like that.
You know, this is just like you. I bust my ass for you all the time. And you don't do anything but sit on your butt like you're doing right now.
What? What is wrong with you?
So what?
Right now he's just kind of bitchy, but the magnitude of his assholery will graduate over time. More on him lately. Businesses are open in Nipawamset on day 2, so you can introduce yourself to more townsfolk. Everybody raises an eyebrow when Adrian tells them that she's moved into the Carno mansion.
Now wait, why does everybody look so shocked when I tell them I bought that place?
That place is haunted.
Haunted?
Shh, not so loud.
Apparently, Carno and his wife, or wives, all died violent deaths in the house, and the locals believe it to be haunted.
Everyone in town seems to believe the Carnavash estate is haunted. Why didn't you tell us?
Why didn't you tell us what? That the locals think the house is haunted? Why would it be the realtor's responsibility to report such a thing?
By the way, before you buy the house, I gots to tell you something. This here estate, it's haunted by the vengeful ghosts of the people who was killed violently here, but I'm giving you a honey of a deal on it. I'm throwing in a scary baby picture for free, and I'll even leave you the magic fingers bed.
Upon arriving home, Adrian finds 2 strangers who have been squatting in the carriage house, Harriet and her son, Cyrus. They have to give themselves up because Harriet finds herself in need of help. Your life is in my hands, you pathetic worm. Adrian immediately gives them jobs as caretakers for the house, which seems like kind of a bad idea on its face, but hey, the more the merrier, I guess.
Yeah, we'll work for nothing. Just room and board.
Harriet primarily acts as the game's comic relief. With a boisterous personality and few social graces, she's sort of the opposite of Adrian, which makes her entertaining, if perhaps a little too goofy for the tone the game's going for at times.
'Cause you know, it's all in the interpretation.
Classic situation when the mentally ill garden gnome who lives in your garage forcibly conducts a tarot reading at your kitchen table. I don't even think she's washed a dish yet. Cyrus is Harriet's son. Seems like he's not exactly playing with a full deck, if you catch my drift, but he's a sweet boy, and it's nice to have some company at the mansion. That's because Phantasmagoria is a very isolated experience, and a very slow-paced one. Let me be perfectly clear, for much of this game, nothing happens. You wake up, walk around the house, investigating rooms and objects, many of which you'll have already seen the days prior. You never know what's going to trigger a progression in the story, so it's really important to keep tabs on even innocuous parts of the mansion. That can be kind of boring, if I'm being perfectly honest. There's some light foreshadowing here if you're astute, such as the painting in the conservatory that's slowly being completed, but by whom? Or a bottle of absinthe at the bar that's gradually being emptied. These are neat little observations to make because they can easily be missed. For much of the game, though, the most interesting moments are just conversations with other characters. When the game takes place almost entirely within your secluded mansion, these interactions can be hard to come by for long stretches of the game, so you really savor them when they occur. The game is certainly what you'd classify as a slow burn, but it doesn't ratchet up the tension in a way that really hooked me. Either nothing is happening or something insane is happening, usually with few ramifications, other than reminding you that you are in fact playing a horror game. It's clearly building towards something, but when you're playing a video game that can be anywhere from 5 to 10 hours long, much of it spent watching the protagonist, staring at things, and walking places, the line between anticipation and apathy can be quite fine. The scariest thing about this house? Venetian plastering and wood paneling in the same room. Oh, honey, that's horrifying. It's clear they're gearing up to have Dawn become the villain, and honestly, Dawn has a pretty great screen presence.
Don't you ever tell me to shut up.
He's no Daniel Day-Lewis, but it's really enjoyable to see him show up and just be an asshole. It's a shame that he isn't utilized more often in the game. The idea of your husband slowly losing his mind and becoming this, shall we say, omnipresent figure in the house, watching your every move and gradually revealing himself to be a legitimate threat, that's actually scary. Even the more mundane aspects of the game would be tinged with anxiety knowing that Dawn could show up at any time. It's hard to feel like there's a fire under your ass to solve the mysteries of the house and help Don when he's just locked away in his dark room for pretty much the whole time. He's also utilized in some strange ways. Let's go ahead and talk about Phantasmagoria's most infamous scene, the reason that the game was banned for sale in Australia, and a scene that provokes divisive reactions to this very day. Adrian is brushing her hair in the bathroom when Don suddenly comes in. He starts kissing her, and she's receptive, presumably because he's been a huge cunt for the last few days. Then he shoves her against the wall and rips her. For obvious reasons, I won't show the act, but the whole scene looks ridiculous despite the gravity it's going for. He's wearing these big plaid boxer shorts, and she has underwear on, and I mean, insofar as this scene is in the game, I guess the goofier it looks the better. It does nothing for the story and doesn't tell us anything we didn't already know. Don's becoming evil, oh, I can't believe it.
So what?
There's no fallout here, no consequence resulting from the act. Adrian looks horribly distressed for about 3.5 seconds, then it shifts to her getting ready for the next day, and it just never comes up again. Roberta has said this scene was, quote, essential to show the extent of Don's descent into madness. Far be it from me to tell anyone what they can or can't write about, but obviously that's not true. It doesn't tell us anything about Don, other than he fucks weird, which we already knew from the intro. Rape is one of those things where if you don't really discuss the ramifications of it, at the very least when it happens to the main character, then as a plot device it just feels gratuitous for the sake of it in sort of a juvenile way. You know, like a 15-year-old trying to be as offensive as possible while I'm writing Shadow the Hedgehog fanfiction. I think artists and writers should have creative freedom, but I can recognize that certain subjects should be treated with a nuclear technician's level of conscientiousness. And, well, I just don't know if Roberta, with her portfolio of lighthearted family goofs, was necessarily the person to be tackling this one. The scene has certainly provoked discussion over the years. As a matter of fact, a dear friend of the channel, Mitch McConnell, blamed Phantasmagoria, with emphasis on this scene for an uptick of gun violence in schools. I don't know, Mitch, I think you're gonna have a hard time drawing a line between A and B here. The only other scenes in-game that came close to reaching this level of controversy were the death scenes.
So what?
There's a small assortment of ridiculous slayings you can witness, mostly in the form of flashbacks or ghosts reenacting the last moments of their life. Although considering how much the violence angle was played up, most of these scenes are pretty tame and there's not a whole lot of them. There are some legitimately cool effects on display occasionally, such as one scene where Harriet is acting as a medium. She vomits some goo onto the table, which ends up morphing into Carnivash's face, and he delivers some troubling words. Namely, that he was once possessed by a demon, and that this spirit now has hold of Dawn.
Zoltan Carnavash was greedy and foolish.
It's pretty creepy, kind of straddles that line between silly and unsettling, not unlike the entire game, really. It's right around this time where the game intensifies. The last hour or so of Phantasmagoria is extremely entertaining. Shit really starts hitting the fan. You find Adrian's cat dead, the piano starts playing itself, you see ghostly history playing out before your very eyes. It's like everywhere you go in the mansion, something unsettling is happening, and you realize that history will soon repeat itself. Adrian meets an old man in Nipawamset named Malcolm, who was a young associate of Carno's while he was still alive. He tells her that a magic trick of Carno's was sabotaged by one of his wives, tired of putting up with his abuse. As a result, he suffered horrible burns but survived, mutilating his wife before the demon possessing him was sealed in a magic ritual performed by Malcolm. It seems this ritual is the only thing that could possibly save Dawn, or at the very least imprison the demon once again. We have now reached the best part of Phantasmagoria. Crazy fucking Dawn. Dawn just goes completely bananas here, and any pretense of him still having a grip over his own sanity is just thrown out the window. David Holm, who plays Dawn, does a great job of just hamming it up big time. It looks like he's having a ton of fun with the role, and that chaotic, uninhibited energy really comes through.
Adrian, are you in here? Where is my Adrian gone? I just want to kiss you. face, honey, and then rip her head off. Woo! Surprise!
On the other hand, Victoria Morcell, who plays Adrian, also does a pretty good job selling the, shall we say, subpar script of Phantasmagoria. Under the circumstances, her emotions are quite believable. She's still holding on to the hope that the man she loves, who, for the record, was pretty likable in the first act of the game, is in there somewhere. But at this point, it's clear that Adrian is not going to reach him. So begins the chase, a self-contradictory section of the game. So much fun, so entertaining, and yet so damn frustrating. Basically, you have to run from Dawn. There's a sequence of events that has to occur in order for you to be successful. For instance, in the dark room, while this struggle occurs, you have to click on the drain cleaner to throw it at Dawn's face. It's sometimes not even clear that what you're witnessing is interactive in any way, so you really just have to move your cursor around, paying attention to what's gameplay and what's a predetermined sequence. The drain cleaner results in Dawn's handsome face being disfigured.
I'm really hungry, honey. Let's order some pizza. A little extra sauce, huh?
And apparently the prosthetic used to mess him up was just barely hanging on by the end of shooting. I guess it's a good thing that the game is in such a low resolution. It already looks pretty silly as is. There's a sense of panic as you run through the halls, trying to avoid Dawn, but once you replay the section enough times, you'll eventually get the hang of it. And you will replay it. There are plenty of wrong ways to go and incorrect actions to take. Not that you'll know what they are without trial and error. Every time you die, you get this scene of Dawn sending a pendulum blade into Adrian's head. It's pretty gruesome, and I actually like the cut immediately after the frame in which the damage is done. That's a rare instance of Phantasmagoria practicing the less is more principle. The other problem I have with this section is that it's really glitchy. If you do something even slightly outside of what's anticipated, you can become soft-locked. Reloading the checkpoint caused numerous problems for me, including crucial items disappearing from my inventory and being forced to reload old saves. Ultimately, I was one room away from reaching the ending when the game just broke on me. I couldn't go where I needed to go. I reloaded, the screen just went black. I actually played through the entire game for a second time, and the exact same thing happened. So I had to find the very last scene of the game online. Adrian is forced to kill Dawn to escape. The demon reveals itself, and Adrian manages to perform a ritual to seal it once again. She walks away, still alive, but a victim of the Carno Mansion nonetheless. What do you say about a game like Phantasmagoria? There are some legitimately praiseworthy aspects of this game. Wandering around the Carno Mansion at night with a spooky MIDI soundtrack is a fun little haunted house experience. Some visual aspects of the game hold up quite well, and even those that don't have taken on a sort of uncanniness that helps the game with its unique identity. The thing is, the game's just not good by traditional adventure game standards. The puzzles are weak, the story is silly, and your ability to explore and interact with the world is hamstrung by the FMV elements. Sierra was trying to operate on the cutting edge of a format that was mere years away from irrelevancy already, and that leaves Phantasmagoria in a bad spot. Compare it to excellent adventure games like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis or Blade Runner, and its insufficiencies become clearer. No matter how much it gets wrong though, this game is kind of fun in its own, sometimes unintentional way. Remember how Stephen King was famously disappointed in Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining? I feel like Phantasmagoria would have made him really happy. It's so silly, so over the top, and clumsy in a way that's sometimes endearing. These moments of charm and tomfoolery are few and far between, but they're enough to make a playthrough worthwhile, especially considering how straightforward and short Phantasmagoria is. It's the perfect game to point and laugh at with some buddies and a six-pack of the second cheapest beer you can find. As a point-and-click adventure, it's squarely mediocre, and that's probably being a bit generous. As a relic from this moment in gaming history, it's definitely worth a look.
So what did you think of Phantasmagoria? The game has developed a real split reputation over the years. As far as I can tell, a lot of the love for this game comes from folks who played it when they were younger and more impressionable. You know, that's a time when horror can really stick with you, no matter how good or bad it is. There's a handful of people out there whose favorite Friday the 13th is Jason Takes Manhattan. That's the power of nostalgia. As a prolific publisher and developer, Sierra fired out adventure game after adventure game, and while certainly not all of them were successful, there were a few that managed to carve out their place in the Sierra pantheon.
One of those successes was the 1993 classic, Gabriel Knight: Sins of the Fathers. It's a fairly traditional point-and-click, and as a game, it couldn't really outshine the excellence that was coming out of LucasArts at the same time. It was everything outside of the gameplay that elevated and continues to elevate Gabriel Knight. The graphical presentation is still impressive, with some of the lushest pixel art to ever appear in a computer game. Having released on CD-ROM, the game also features an excellent soundtrack and a fully voice-acted cast of characters. Those cast members including Mark Hamill, Michael Dorn, and would you believe it, Tim Curry as Gabriel himself.
Give me a break, the devil himself couldn't change you.
Well, if the devil had great legs, perhaps, like yours.
Sarcastically, I don't know what genius decided to cast Tim Curry as a Cajun man living in New Orleans, but sincerely, it kinda works.
You better take good care of this, Bruno. This is not just another of your hip art pieces, you know.
The voice acting is an important factor here because it accompanies an extensive and mature script written by Jane Jensen. Looking back, Jane was a Sierra Online MVP, responsible for some of the developer's most timeless stories. When she pitched Gabriel Knight, she didn't have much leverage or experience, and Ken Williams wasn't convinced that Sierra should pursue a project aimed towards older audiences. Still, they went forward with the project, and Gabriel Knight helped prove that graphic adventures could be sophisticated affairs, rivaling TV or movies. The game's success, as mentioned, was largely a result of its story and characters. Taking place in New Orleans, you play as the titular character. Gabriel is a struggling novelist and owner of a bookstore. In an attempt to gather material for his novel, he becomes increasingly involved in a spate of killings, being called the Voodoo Murders. As he wades deeper into the murders, he becomes increasingly bent on finding the culprit or culprits behind them and the supernatural ties through which they're linked. Gabriel is a wisecracking, womanizing ass clown.
I can believe that. You're doing a lot for me right now.
He can't see a pretty lady without awooga humana humana-ing, and can barely let an interaction go by without laying down some heavy sarcasm. His assistant at the bookstore, Grace Nakamura, is voiced by Leah Remini. Don't worry, they don't make her do a fake Japanese accent the way they had Tim Curry do a Cajun one.
I'm gonna take the tweezers for a bit.
Good. You're beginning to look a little scruffy.
Just trying to make you feel at home.
She assists Gabriel in his investigations, and has more than enough backbone to stand up against his repeated advances.
How come we haven't gone out yet?
I'm still waiting around for that lobotomy. As soon as I get it, I'll let you know.
Gabriel Knight: Sins of the Fathers is looked at quite fondly to this day, and a sequel seemed like a no-brainer, but the form it would take would surprise adventure game fans and leave them with mixed feelings. What, you thought Sierra wouldn't get more use out of that brand new soundstage they just built? Think again. Gabriel Knight would be retooled as an FMV adventure featuring a brand new cast of pretty low-profile actors. As funny as it would be to see Tim Curry made up to look like Gabriel, and as enduringly offensive as it would be to see Leah Remini made up to look like Grace, they decided against bringing back the cast for this one. There would still be puzzles and some degree of player input, but the focus would be on making Gabriel Knight an interactive movie. Many hardcore point-and-click fans would roll their eyes at the notion. FMV adventures seldom featured well-crafted gameplay and were often accompanied by corny acting and cheesy effects. With a relatively small budget, especially compared to Phantasmagoria, hopes were not sky high for Gabriel Knight 2, and a lot of people felt that their approach to this sequel was a mistake. Whether or not these predictions would come true would be revealed on Christmas Eve of 1995 when The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery, was released for DOS, Windows, and Macintosh computers. Forewarning, this game begins where the previous one ends, so even though we're not talking about Gabriel Knight 1, there are going to be spoilers for that game to follow. The original game concludes with Gabriel finding out that he has descended from a long line of people who defend humanity from supernatural forces. His descendants of the Ritter clan are known as Schattenjägers, German for shadow hunters. Gabriel, being the last of the Ritter line, undertook the initiation rites, becoming the new Schattenjäger, despite his better judgment. He becomes owner of his family's ancestral estate, Schloss Ritter, which is where we join him now in the second game. He toils away at his typewriter, working on a new book which will hopefully replicate the success of his previous novel, based on the Voodoo murders. Late at night, there's a knock at the door. A group of people from the local town of Rittersburg have come to seek the help of a Schattenjäger.
Well, hello there. Shouldn't those be torches?
You might be wondering, is Gabriel Knight 2 really a horror game? It's kinda up for debate, but I still think it belongs here. And that's because it's about werewolf.
Werewolf.
Werewolf?
Werewolf.
A little girl has been found dead, mutilated, and the people of Rittersburg believe the culprit is a werewolf. Not exactly information you go to the police with, but a defender of the downtrodden and investigator of the supernatural, that's gonna be your guy. With some reluctance, Gabriel agrees to, at the very least, look into the case, and this is where the game begins. Gabriel Knight 2 plays very much like Phantasmagoria, and that's because the games share an engine. I'd say there's a stronger emphasis on puzzle solving in Gabriel Knight, but for the most part, if you've played one, you can understand the other. Rather than having the entire game environment rendered on a 3D workstation, this is actually only occasionally the case here. In large part, environments here are either actual photographs or composites of different photographs, edited in order to draw your eyes to certain focal points. It can be a little all over the place. Some frames look like amateur photographs taken for Realtor.com, some look like obvious Photoshop jobs, and many of the frames are given some filters, either for the sake of giving them an artistic flair or hiding imperfections. It's serviceable. I do think that Phantasmagoria's renders had a bit more character thanks to the colorful and garish material work inside of the Carno estate. However, the muted palette does work well in conveying this German autumn mood. The benefit of having these more realistic environments is that the quality of the videos is substantially better. Far less often do character composites have these jagged cutouts as they do in Phantasmagoria, which means you're not taken out of the moment quite as often. It's just as well too because there is heaps more video in Gabriel Knight 2 than in Phantasmagoria and most other FMV games in general. This is an extremely cinematic game, with cutscenes occurring pretty much every time you click on anything related to progression. Movement from room to room, picking up new items, dialogue with characters, it's all conveyed via full motion video, and the quality of the video is very good for the time. The shot composition, lighting, and general attention to detail really did stand out amongst other FMV adventures. Despite the fact that Gabriel Knight 2 was largely shot in front of a green screen, it feels like a real professional production. Certainly there are elements of camp at work here, but generally speaking, The Beast Within presents a compelling plot that really sinks its teeth into you early. If you can get over the initial hurdle of some corny effects and the aged video quality, you'll quickly find yourself wondering just what'll happen next. Gabriel's story takes place across the city of Munich. He finds that the little girl from Rittersburg was far from the only victim, and the working theory of local police is that the murders are the work of escaped zoo wolves. Well, with bodies gruesomely dissected and paw prints the size of Gabriel's head found at the crime scene, this hypothesis doesn't hold much water. But that won't stop the Munich police from pursuing the theory, and the police won't stop Gabriel from poking his nose where it doesn't belong, and not for lack of trying. Gabriel, played by Dean Erickson, is the star of this game. I mean, yes, he literally is the star of this game, but more than that, he's the star of this game. If I was a no-name actor, with only a minor role in 3 episodes of Frasier to my name, and I was told that I would have to follow in the footsteps of Tim Curry, I would be shitting my pants. Dean Erickson, against the odds, does a great job with this role. This is a result of Erickson correctly identifying that replicating Tim Curry's act would just be a losing game. Instead, the role was reimagined, maintaining the central pillars of Gabriel's character but subduing them.
How do you say, quid pro quo in German?
There is no translation.
Thanks so much for your time.
Sit down!
Ericsson's Gabriel is less bombastic, putting his southern charm to work in a far more believable and likable way.
Probably a dumb question, but what sort of entertaining do you do?
Do you like women, Herr Knight?
I've been known to.
The original game's presentation had more in common with a cartoon than a live-action film, so Curry's scenery-chewing antics were far more appropriate in that case. Ericsson's lower-key performance is just what Gabriel Knight 2 needs. The character is quietly reinvented, which works not only for the format, but also thematically. In the last game, Gabriel was a starving artist, now he's a Schottenjäger. There's a weight of responsibility that has muted his more outrageous quirks, but they still manage to sneak past in ways that feel charming rather than overbearing.
So, tell me about the club members.
I don't gossip about our members, Herr Knight.
Gossip? With you? Please. I've never met anyone as obviously discreet as you.
Thank you.
Bet you could drop a load if you wanted to, though. You probably know more about what goes on around here than anyone.
True. At least I used to. But with all these new people coming in, I'm not sure I know anything anymore.
All these new people?
With a crooked smile and a pair of eyebrows that seem to be competing with each other for an Emmy, you never quite know what Gabriel is thinking at any given time, but you can make an educated guess. Smartass, but never smarmy. Confidence kept in check by hints of awkwardness, as though Gabriel himself can't believe what he's getting away with. It's a surprisingly nuanced performance. Playing opposite Gabriel is Grace Nakamura, played by actress Joanne Takahashi. Grace initially is left in charge of the bookstore back in New Orleans. After a long period of radio silence, she decides to fly to Germany and hunt Gabriel down at Schloss Ritter. By then, he's already long left for Munich, leaving Grace alone to communicate with Gabriel via snail mail and research the case to the best of her ability. In comparison with Gabriel's character development, Grace's personality has been amped up. She's aggressive and impatient when she wants an answer, steamrolling through conversations and wearing impertinence on her face. In point of fact, she initially comes across as entitled and unlikable.
I'm sorry, Herr Knight's not here.
He's great.
You must be Grace. I think we spoke on the phone.
Uh-huh. When is Gabriel due back?
I don't know. He's gone for some time. Maybe you would like to stay at the castle and wait for him?
I don't have much choice, do I?
I can see they were shooting for a kind of hard-headed audaciousness to contrast with Gabriel's dulcet southern charms, but Grace's performance often skirts the line of outright petulance. Not for nothing, she believes Gerda, Gabriel's assistant and assistant to his late grandfather, is sleeping with Gabriel, who she obviously has feelings for. Once that's cleared up, her demeanor softens a bit and she works better as Gabriel's counterpart, but first impressions are pretty hard to shake. She also acts as a dual protagonist. The game is comprised of 6 chapters, and with each one, you'll switch to the perspective of one character or the other. Gabriel's sections are focused on the practical, investigatory elements of the game. Finessing and charming people to learn information, infiltrating social circles to get closer to certain individuals, and putting himself in danger in an effort to solve the mystery. Grace's sections are primarily focused on researching the higher concepts involved in the case. While it sounds like it could be boring, it actually results in some of the most enjoyable parts of the game. The Beast Within weaves real German history with paranormal elements, and you can't help but form theories of your own as you fall down this rabbit hole with Grace. Particularly, the story focuses on King Ludwig II of Bavaria, a real-life king who is considered to be quite an enigmatic figure in German history. His introverted tendencies, eccentric personality, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death have all been subject to speculation over the years, much of it romanticized to say the least. He makes a great figure to center mysteries around. There are 2 anchors to the plot, one somewhat historical and the other purely fictitious. The latter of these is the discovery that King Ludwig suffered from lycanthropy, turned into a werewolf by a strange figure called the Black Wolf, who keeps popping up in Grace's research. The more historically grounded mystery involves Ludwig II's real-life friendship with the composer Richard Wagner. Supposedly, Wagner wrote a final opera before his death, one for which the sheet music exists but has never been uncovered. Of course, this didn't really happen, not to mention you find out that this opera is comprised of chords that somehow force a werewolf's transformation, a last-ditch effort from Ludwig and Wagner to expose the Black Wolf, but one that couldn't be put into motion before Wagner's untimely death. Uncovering the existence of long-lived werewolves while simultaneously hunting down a missing 3-act opera from one of history's great composers, it's a terrific setup. It straddles the line between an Indiana Jones movie and an episode of The X-Files, kind of benefiting from the best of both worlds.
My brother says that Wagner was too egotistical to have produced a lost opera. If he was working on something new, every person in Bayreuth would have heard about it. On the other hand, it was in Ludwig's character to have wanted a private opera.
That's why, despite the focus on research sounding dry, Grace's sections are really at the heart of what makes Gabriel Knight 2 feel like such a grand adventure. Before discussing Gabriel's section, I'll just touch on the puzzles of The Beast Within. Puzzles are a major part of any point-and-click adventure, and yet, so many of these games seem to get caught up in so many of the same traps. Unfortunately, Gabriel Knight 2 does not manage to deftly avoid all of these. There's a compound problem that seems to plague adventure games with digitized actors and photorealistic environments: navigation and observation. When creating an environment for a 2D game, it can be made abundantly clear where the player can and can't go. It's a little hairier when using real-life locations and actors. Moving to different points in the screen will take characters to different rooms or areas in a given location. The layout of these areas is often somewhat ambiguous and difficult to understand. You may walk past the same room several times, not realizing that arbitrarily clicking the border on that screen will take you to your next destination. These portals from one room to another are often poorly telegraphed with the game's graphics. This will ultimately lead you to hover your mouse around every square inch of the screen, waiting for it to change shape, signifying that you can enter a location. This is especially a problem when dealing with the numerous pixel hunts, in which one blurry object in the background is actually a game-critical item that's necessary for progression. I believe this is a reason why games like Phantasmagoria feature heavily simplified puzzles. It's just hard to reconcile object-finding gameplay with this visual format, at least with the resolution being what it was. These problems really plague Grace's chapters. You spend a lot of time wandering around historical sites and museums. In order to advance, you sometimes have to look at one particular plaque on the wall or a diary entry that's barely visible, blending together with all the other museum displays. Pair this with confusing navigation, which can sometimes have you skipping past rooms without realizing it, and you've got a recipe for some occasional frustration. Now, I'll be fair here, there are some excellent puzzles in Gabriel Knight 2. One of my favorites is close to the beginning, when you have to convince a worker at the zoo to let you into the wolf enclosure. First, you have to engage in dialogue with the boss.
So, you're in charge of the zoo's mammal divisions?
Yes.
What kind of training do you need for that, Doc?
I realize you Americans hate titles, but people refer to me as Herr Dr. Klingmann here. Herr Doctor will also do.
Gabriel keeps a tape recorder on him to record dialogue with everyone he speaks to. With the boss's speech recorded, you have to pick out specific words from his dialogue to construct a sentence, which is then played back over the walkie-talkie, which convinces the worker to let you in.
Thomas, Herr Dr. Klingmann here. Show our words to Mr. Knight. Thomas?
Ja, Thomas hier.
Herr Dr. Klingmann here. Show our wolves to Mr. Knight.
Ja, okay, Herr Doctor.
That's a pretty clever idea. In fact, given how close to the beginning of the game this is, I thought I was being primed to do this sentence mixing more often. But no, this is the only time you ever use the tape recorder's splice function. On the flip side, Gabriel Knight 2 has got some pretty brutal instances of moon logic. The game's puzzles become progressively more cryptic and difficult to parse as you approach the end, and this is really detrimental to the game's pacing. At one point, you have to grab a pillowcase from Grace's bed and a dinner roll from somebody's table at the local bar. Then you have to distract a pigeon with the dinner roll and slip a pillowcase over it, kidnapping it, then traveling to the museum, releasing the pigeon to distract a museum guard, and finding a tiny panel built into the side of an inconspicuous wall, which contains 1/3 of Wagner's opera. Perhaps the most egregious puzzle occurs close to the beginning of the game. You have to buy a cuckoo clock, because why wouldn't you buy a fucking cuckoo clock, okay? There's a cuckoo clock salesperson, this is a Sierra game, you buy the cuckoo clock. Then you have to take the cuckoo clock to a certain hallway inside of a certain building and combine the cuckoo clock with a potted plant, which hides the clock underneath its plantness. Then you have to go into the foyer, wait a while for the clock to start making noise, which distracts the doorman, allowing you to root through his desk and steal his keys. That's insane. Even if I was just going through the motions, trying everything, it wouldn't occur to me to click on the cuckoo clock, then click on this potted plant in this particular hallway. And even if I did accidentally do that, I can't tell you that I would instinctively walk to the entryway and just stand there for a few minutes. Now, to tell you the truth, I can't say I'm the biggest fan of the original Gabriel Knights gameplay for some of these same reasons. The puzzles are often just a little too much of a leap in logic. You place a lot of trust in adventure game developers because the design of an adventure game is really easy to screw up. That's especially true if the developers are consciously trying to make the game difficult. Once that delicate trust has been shattered in a player, it's very hard to regain. You don't want somebody sitting there with an itchy trigger finger waiting to bring up a game facts walkthrough every time they're presented with a challenge. Gabriel Knight 2 comes dangerously close at times to being that game. I really genuinely enjoy a well-crafted adventure game. I don't like ruining them for myself, but neither can I sit here stuffing pigeons into pillowcases all day long and burying cuckoo clocks into the soil of potted plants. The beast within's puzzles aren't necessarily its strong suit. Once again, that would be its characters, the majority of which we get to know during Gabriel's chapters. His investigation leads him to a men's hunting club. Here, he's welcomed due to his Ritter lineage, a respected family line that allows him to rub shoulders with the aristocrats in the club. Some of these members are a little prickly, not too keen on welcoming this American kid, and rightfully eyeing him with suspicion. Others welcome him with open arms. As a matter of fact, Gabriel meets some extremely likable figures that run the gamut of German stereotypes. You've got the plump and jovial Germans that swill beer from steins and accept Gabriel for who he is.
Hey, Henneman. Looks like we finally have a chance to talk.
Well, as long as my glass is full, you can ask me anything you like.
You've got worker Germans, like Gabriel's estate lawyer, Ubergrau. He's a little stiff, a little no-nonsense, but he's a sweetheart underneath it all.
I trust this morning finds you well, Mr. Knight.
Hell, I'm lucky it's found me at all. You can call me Gabriel, by the way.
Oh, of course. Call me Harald. Harry's okay, too.
Thanks, Harry.
You've got the kindly tavern keep, the bratwurst lady, Georg, the friendly composer. This game has done more to rehabilitate the post-World War II German image than Tangerine Dream and Gothic combined.
It is a very old town. The walls around it were built in 1438, but the city is a few centuries older than that.
I'm not an ASMR person, but when I hear this jovial old German man talk about local history, I get it. Few characters match the unadulterated on-screen electricity as Baron Friedrich von Glauer, played by actor Peter Lucas. I know I said Gabriel was the star of the show, but man, von Glauer gives him a run for his money.
We normally meet here in the evening.
But you may come here anytime you wish. I'll inform Xaver.
He's the proprietor of the hunting club and immediately takes a shine to Gabriel, who reciprocates. As Gabriel begins to suspect a club member, Von Zell, of lycanthropy, von Glauer seems to understand that Gabriel has a greater purpose and assists him in subtle ways.
You don't care that he's prying into our private business? What possible motive could he have?
Gar! Please. He's my guest. You're the one who's turning that into an inquisition.
One such way is inviting Gabriel on their hunting trip, giving him an opportunity to further investigate the men, Von Zell in particular. It's during this trip that Gabriel's suspicions are confirmed. Von Zell is caught devouring a body, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is our werewolf. Gabriel is forced to kill Von Zell as he's transformed into a funny-looking 3D wolf, but not before being bitten and contracting the lycanthropy. However, that's not the only discovery Gabriel makes. Turns out that von Glauer is a werewolf himself, and in many ways, the central villain of the story.
That by the pass of the second moon, when the sickness wanes and the blood has inflamed the greater part of you, you will see things differently. You will need me then, and I think you will want me then.
There are actually some subtle tells that this is the case, like real subtle. There's a part where Gabriel walks into von Glauer's bedroom, and you can see that von Glauer is alerted to Gabriel's presence because he can smell him. That is a wicked attention to detail.
What is it? What's happened?
But the degree to which von Glauer is a bad person is quite complicated and one of the most interesting conflicts across the game's story. Gabriel likes von Glauer, and von Glauer likes Gabriel. Likes him.
Now I'm really intrigued.
His desire to learn more about Gabriel stops just short of obsession, as the two share meaningful conversations throughout the game. Von Glauer offers up his lover to keep Gabriel company one drunken night, which could be chalked up to him just being a standard German sex guy, but later on he pays the sleeping Gabriel a visit, and it would be hard to ignore the homoeroticism in the scene. Yet, von Glauer himself never advances on Gabriel. He genuinely respects him as a person and finds the inner workings of his mind to be fascinating.
Did most of them come to the club through you?
For the most part. Though occasionally, fate throws one into my lap.
This friendship between them is something he values. Von Glauer has spent much of his past several hundred years alone. This is why he established the hunting club, in order to find suitable candidates to become werewolves like him. Namely, people who share his philosophy, a worldview that venerates the primeval instinct, giving in to one's urges without delusions of morality or societal order.
Through civilization, man has lost his physical self, his sensory power, his instinct, if you will.
Von Zell seemed to be the prime candidate, but ultimately, he just couldn't withstand the transformation and went mad, killing wantonly and leaving quite a mess behind him. With von Zell's death, von Glauer has been left alone yet again. Well, not quite. With Gabriel now undergoing the transformation, von Glauer hopes to take the young man under his wing and teach him to embrace lycanthropy. Still, he offers space, understanding that Gabriel must hate him, and allowing him to come to his own decision.
I did not intend for it to happen so soon and in such a way.
A true gentleman, even at his most bestial. The final act of the game takes place in the Munich Opera House after a time skip. Gabriel continues to suffer with the pain of the transformation. Meanwhile, Grace and her colleague have compiled the opera, which once played will reveal any werewolf who hears it. In her research, Grace has found that a werewolf's curse can be broken if the individual who turned them is killed. They've arranged to have von Glauer show up at the opera house, so very soon it'll be showtime. This entire section does not play to the game's strengths. You have to complete a large number of objectives in a specific order so that the performance goes off without a hitch. Many of the game's bigger problems regarding navigation and puzzle design are on full display here, resulting in a grand final act where most of the time is spent just wishing you could get it over with. It's evident that Gabriel's demeanor is changing alongside his transformation, making him into a volatile and rage-filled individual.
If you can't manage a simple goddamn fucking diagram, I'll take care of things myself! Gracie!
As though they've swapped personalities, Grace maintains a cool head, understanding that without patience, they'll never have a chance to change Gabriel back. Grace tries to keep him locked away where he can neither harm others nor himself by hearing the opera. However, plans go awry, and he's forced to make an appearance on stage himself, which results in a fabulous cutscene. As the song reaches its peak, von Glauer and Gabriel have no choice but to transform, retreating to the basement for one final puzzle. There's always one more, and it's always a huge pain in the ass. That's just the adventure game code. You essentially have to trap von Glauer's wolf form in the furnace room, which means running around, closing the correct doors, and guiding him to the right room without running into him. It's a logic-based puzzle, and a particularly tough one. I can't rightly say I nailed it the first time, or the third, Or the 8th, or whatever. In a gripping climax, they manage to destroy von Glauer, breaking the curse and freeing Gabriel. A bittersweet ending to quite an epic adventure. Von Glauer is a complex villain and one who's easy to feel bad for. He himself was cursed before he was even born, forced to undergo a transformation that he couldn't understand and do things that he didn't want to do. He's been forced to construct a worldview around his nature in order to justify and excuse the atrocities he's inflicted, indirectly or otherwise. Von Glauer and Gabriel share a fair number of things in common, not the least of which being that they were never allowed to choose their lot in life. Von Glauer is the product of a curse visited upon his father, while Gabriel is born into a line of Schottenjägers. Both are guided in some sense by instinct not under their control, but this instinct drives them in opposite directions. Von Glauer's instinct is primal, ferocious, the urge to let go of things that separate humans from animals and return to ourselves at our most fundamental. Gabriel's instinct is to elevate humanity beyond its bestial compulsions, to preserve civilization and actively overcome the primal urges that we feel. In both cases, the means to these ends are messy, to say the least. Von Glauer is forced to engage with civilized behavior that runs counter to his philosophies. Gabriel, in an effort to uphold the fragile trust that binds us, has to engage in some pretty down and dirty behavior. This makes it easy for him to understand where von Glauer is coming from, to feel some degree of conflict eroding that sense of civility. They're both good people, or at least not malicious people, but are bound to their opposing paths by circumstance. As much as von Glauer attempts to unify these paths, the enmity between them is simply too strong, a force of nature, so to speak. Von Glauer has lived a lonely life and is desperate for true friendship, romantic intimacy, whatsoever will allow him to be understood. As a Schottenjäger, Gabriel cannot abide and is forced to say goodbye to a friend. Gabriel Knight 2 is a game surprisingly rich with themes and symbolism, a story full of heart wrapped around a game that is sometimes at odds with itself. Some unfortunate puzzle and environmental designs mar the experience, but they don't ruin it. Jane Jensen's strong writing featuring a great cast of characters managed to weave a tale that single-handedly justified the use of FMV in a time where it was not exactly in favor. Are these performances Oscar-worthy? No, but most of the cast, especially Erickson and Lucas, nail their roles. Gabriel strikes this balance of playful coyness and brash confidence that gets him out of trouble just as often as it gets him into it. Von Glauer carries himself with the elegance of a man who's been honing his patriciate niceties for 300 years. A man who spent lifetimes faking it and hungry for something real, like a starving wolf. It can be a little cheesy, some of the effects perhaps haven't aged so gracefully, but there's an undeniable charm running through a beast within, even in its amateurish qualities. By all counts, the game shouldn't be good, but it stands as one of very few testaments to the kinds of stories full-motion video-centric games were capable of telling. For anyone who enjoys thoughtfully written supernatural stories and campy 90s goodness, I recommend playing it.
On a fall evening as a chill wind blows and the leaves turn color outside, I can hardly imagine a more perfect game to curl up with a hot beverage and a blanket than Gabriel Knight 2. But before we say goodbye to Sierra Online, there's just one more game that we have to cover. One of Sierra's strangest games, and a swan song for the company's lofty FMV dreams. Phantasmagoria 2. I don't know about that one. Why would it be that exciting? Let's maybe Phantasmagoria 2.
Phantasmagoria was Roberta Williams' dream game and is famously her all-time favorite project to have worked on at Sierra. It sold exceptionally well, which meant, of course, a sequel would have to be shoved out the door as soon as possible. Only Roberta wasn't interested in directing a follow-up. Well, that and she had returned to work on her first love, King's Quest. The previous entry in the series had mainly been helmed by a Sierra employee named Lorelei Shannon, while Roberta worked on Phantasmagoria 1. So the follow-up to Sierra's horror hit would too be placed in the hands of Lorelei Shannon. Phantasmagoria, a puzzle of flesh, would tread a very different path from its predecessor. While the original game clung to vintage horror tropes and 80s slasher flick gore, the follow-up was more in lockstep with contemporary horror. With the release of films like John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness and Adrian Lyne's Jacob's Ladder, it was clear that tastes were changing. Horror fans were feeling some of that post-1980s gore fatigue, and in the wake of that hangover, there was increased interest in the cerebral, the psychological, and the symbolic. The workmanlike approach to filmmaking of the previous decade was giving way to raw, unrefined productions. The necessity of studio system meddling was thrown into question as the spirit of independent film corrected the perceived mistakes of the 1980s. The stories being told at this time were eminently more personal. Love it or hate it, if it costs nothing to make, then there's nothing to lose but time. The risky, complex, and often non-linear films of the time informed the writing and design of Phantasmagoria 2. The game had a substantial budget, roughly equivalent to its predecessor, but it didn't quite reap the same rewards. While sales figures aren't known, the game was not the blockbuster success that Sierra was hoping for. Evidently, reviews for Puzzle of Flesh ranged from middling at best to downright scathing. Perhaps more than any other Sierra game, Phantasmagoria 2 has been the beneficiary of hindsight. Some of those elements that players found off-putting in 1996 are now seen as bold, unconventional, and forward-thinking by proponents of the game. Is it greater than the sum of its parts, or is the criticism well-deserved? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. Apologies in advance, the regular CD version of the game adamantly refused to work on my system, so almost all the movie scenes here are heavily interlaced, and at risk of repeating myself, your discretion is advised. In Puzzle of Flesh, you play as Curtis Craig, employee of pharmaceutical company Wintech. Curtis is recovering from a psychotic break that occurred a year prior, and he's doing his best to live a normal life in the meantime. The very first puzzle in the game is the stuff of dubious legend. It has you finding Curtis's wallet before leaving for work.
Oh man, no wallet.
Searching around the room, you see that it's under the couch. Easy enough, I'll just move this tiny couch, or reach my arm under it. My arm that is clearly and unambiguously long enough to reach the wallet. Guess again, you're not thinking like Curtis. You need to pick up Curtis's pet rat, Blob, and let it loose under the couch to retrieve the wallet. But in order to get the disobedient Blob back to Curtis, you also need to find a granola bar and place it next to the couch, which lures Blob back out, who for some reason has brought Curtis the wallet. Making this the first puzzle in your game is like flopping your dick out onto the table in front of everyone.
You drag my wallet under there, you can just go bring it back.
Except your dick looks bad, and everyone runs away screaming. The game takes place in Seattle, Washington, and you're given a small handful of areas to go. In that way, it's immediately different than the original Phantasmagoria. That game was deliberately isolating, where if anything, Puzzle of Flesh is an introvert's nightmare. You're in the big city and can hardly go anywhere without running into Curtis's friends or co-workers, the latter of whom you'll meet as Curtis spends a day at work. First of all, there's Jocelyn, Curtis's girlfriend. She's very horny.
Remember the company Christmas party?
Oh yeah, I remember after the party too.
Then you've got Teresa. She's also very horny, but in a more insidious home-wrecking kind of way.
Looks like someone's got a crush on you.
Yeah, well,
it's from me.
You've got Trevor Barnes, Curtis's best friend, who is flamboyantly gay and very horny, but in a fun gay guy way.
But here I am on time and fresh as a daisy.
A daisy, huh? You know, I could say something.
Don't you go there. Don't go there. I'll have to see you later, meanwhile.
We've got Bob, who's a complete asshole to Curtis and with no discernible horniness.
Forget it, rat boy. They wouldn't help you anyway. We both know that I'm the one that's gonna get that big promotion, so, piss off.
Then there's Curtis. He's very horny.
I want to chew through your bra straps like a rabid poodle. I want to smear your naked body with strawberry jelly. I want to pluck blueberries out of your quivering navel with my teeth.
So what?
All in all, quite a cast of characters to spend the workday with, wouldn't you say? You spend most of the first day just wasting time talking to your coworkers and looking at emails on Curtis's computer. Seriously, Curtis bothers everybody while they're trying to get work done. This points to the first major problem I have with Phantasmagoria 2 as a game, the triggers required to move forward. This was an issue I had with Gabriel Knight 2, but I would say it's actually worse here. You have to talk to absolutely everybody, sometimes multiple times, sometimes only after talking to another person. Then you have to show everybody the crap in your inventory. Photographs of Curtis's parents.
No, you look a lot like your mom.
Postcards Curtis got in the mail.
I know you like old movie stars.
Oh, let me see.
Pictures from the workplace Christmas party.
Oh, yeah.
Curtis needs every person's input on everything, and the story cannot advance until he gets it. Why does everybody need to know what your parents look like, Curtis? You work for a major pharmaceutical company, Curtis. Shouldn't you be at your desk ruining people's lives right now? Why are you showing your mortal enemy a picture of the Christmas party, Curtis?
Hey, Bob. You taking the same date to the Christmas party this year? I figure she'll give you a discount now that she's turned 60.
Kiss my ass.
Ouch, what a devastatingly witty retort.
You know, I take it back. Curtis is doing some good work out there. That's all right. Then you have to go to the computer and see the right blurb, which triggers additional dialogue with somebody else in the office, which lets you go back to the computer, which might let you enter another room and like look at a cardboard box or something, etc., etc. I seriously thought my game was broken at points, but it turns out I couldn't advance because I didn't show Jocelyn a fucking Tide sample Curtis got in the mail or something. And by that I mean his penis. The number and specificity of actions you have to take in order to progress is a bit irritating, and they often don't have any relevance to the story at all. I like having a lot of minor interactions if they're optional, but making them all necessary kinda damages the game's pacing. Anyway, the story kicks into high gear when about halfway through the workday, Curtis starts seeing violent hallucinations, which isn't unusual for anyone who's worked a white-collar job, but these ones are especially bad. These nightmarish visions specifically relate to Curtis's mother. She was physically and mentally abusive towards Curtis as a child, and then, one day, hung herself from the ceiling fan. Not only that, but Curtis's father, who also worked for Wintech, died in a car accident when Curtis was just a lad. These memories, which have long been repressed, are now bubbling to the surface of Curtis's mind, causing him to see and hear horrible things that aren't really there. Curtis is able to ground himself thanks to his support network, really just Trevor. He's able to get Curtis to open up and spill some thoughts and feelings about his past.
I'd rather be dead than have to go back there.
Hey, nobody's talking about sending you back. Just talking about counseling, okay?
Jocelyn is sort of there for Curtis, but they don't really talk about much outside of fucking.
And you made those sounds, those sexy whimpers.
Though for some reason, Curtis desperately wants to keep their relationship a secret.
Aw, look at the two little lovebirds, aren't they cute?
Keep your voice down.
Keep your voice down? You were just playing tonsil hockey with her in front of the entire town. As Curtis goes about his business, the hallucinations become more frequent and more intense, with visions of him brutalizing his own loved ones as well. Incidentally, Bob is found brutally murdered in Curtis's cubicle the next morning, and the police interview goes about as swimmingly as you could imagine.
Why didn't you like Mr. Arnold, Mr. Craig?
He was an ass.
Just a witness to your crimes.
Who are you talking to?
Oh, no one.
In fact, Curtis undergoes a pretty big personality shift after this incident.
You're acting really weird.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry, Joss. I guess finding disemboweled dead guys in my cubicle just throws me right the fuck off.
You know, I don't really feel bad for Bob. I think the bad karma fairy got him.
Bad karma fairy, huh? She sounds like one dangerous bitch.
You know, he's a gigantic asshole sometimes, and he's abysmal at flirting, but, you know, Curtis is a strangely endearing protagonist.
I'll be there at 7. Don't disappoint me.
Don't you worry, baby. Unlike me, the disappointment won't come for a while.
Hey, rat girl. I don't suppose you know what the hell's going on, huh?
Damn, Curtis, save the dirty talk for later. In terms of structure, Puzzle of Flesh is closer to this idea of an interactive movie than any other Sierra game. The gameplay and puzzles for the majority of the game are quite minimal, and in fact kind of lame. What few brain teasers you're posed with are mostly simple object hunts. Really, you're meant to spend each day visiting as many locations as you can and talking to everyone you can. This triggers plot cutscenes, which in turn allows you to end your day and begin again the next day. A big part of this restrictive new approach is in the visual style of Phantasmagoria 2. Likely due to a combination of budgetary constraints and director intent, the entire game is shot on location. No Photoshop, composite backgrounds, no 3D renders, or at least very few. The buildings you walk around in are real sets, the items you interact with are actual objects. Everything in Puzzle of Flesh is a photograph or a video. This cinematic presentation gives the game a more cohesive visual flavor, and some of the shot compositions are quite thoughtfully put together, no worse than the average 90s TV drama anyway. However, this approach severely limits what adventure game aspects can actually be incorporated here. I mean, this is an adventure game, right? Phantasmagoria 1 was already a very pared down, simplified vision of point-and-click gaming, and the sequel feels even more constrained in that regard. You feel like nothing surprising can occur on the interactive end of things because everything is a photo. With few exceptions, the extent of the interactivity here is just picking items up and then showing them to people. Navigation is often even more disjointed than Gabriel Knight 2. Here, I just want to leave out the door I came in. Instead of clicking on it, I have to turn about 270 degrees away from the door, then click on the left side of the screen, then click the door. That's just senseless. The gameplay side of things is predictable. Anything worth paying attention to is going to occur in one of the game's many FMV sequences, and I do mean many. This game is made up of hours of live action video, and thankfully most of this end of the game is pretty entertaining. But as an adventure game, Phantasmagoria 2 fails conclusively. One example of a doofus puzzle occurs when Curtis tries to open a panel on a metal box. You have to use a screwdriver as a chisel and hammer it into the side of the box. That's already kind of silly, but far from the most offensive puzzle we've seen today. However, instead of just selecting the hammer and then the screwdriver, you have to select the hammer, slide it on over to the view window here, then select the screwdriver and combine it with the hammer so they become one item, then use that combo item on the box. You know, the old ham driver to the fucking metal box shtick. As I recall, this is the only time item combination is used in this way. It's a roundabout way of achieving something that should be simpler and makes the game feel like it was designed by someone who just didn't really understand the fundamentals of the genre. Curtis begins to suspect that he's somehow responsible for Bob's murder, which leads him to make an appointment with a therapist.
I'm Dr. Harburn.
Nice to meet you, Doctor.
Nice to meet you. Go ahead and have a seat.
These therapy sessions are actually some of the more interesting parts of the game. They're an excuse to have Curtis sit his ass down and deliver exposition without it coming across as ham-fisted. This has the potential to be a slog, but Curtis and the people who surround him are, by and large, pretty interesting characters. Despite playing as Curtis, we know very little about him, and that makes these insights into his abusive childhood and confused state of mind quite captivating. It's here in these discussions where the thematic depth and ambition of Puzzle's story really shines through. Curtis talks about how his mother began to hate him as a child, never hugging him or providing him with emotional support. Instead, she physically and mentally abused him, often putting him in a dress. In the very same appointment, Curtis reveals that he's bisexual, secretly attracted to his best friend, Trevor.
I'm kind of attracted to Trevor. And that worries me because I don't know if I should be with Jocelyn. I don't want to hurt her, you know?
This wells up conflict within him, confusion, and thoughts of nature versus nurture. Was this bound to happen, or has the trajectory of my life changed because of my mother's psychosis? This also causes internal conflict of another sort. Curtis is dating Jocelyn. She loves him, and he, at the very least, cares about her feelings. Well, usually. Curtis and Trevor are friends, and Curtis's feelings, if voiced, could very well do damage to that friendship, which is seemingly his only lifeline. Trevor, by the way, is a great character. Like with Curtis, his sexuality feels incidental, not like something to be gawked at, which frankly would have been pretty unusual for a game released in '96. Yeah, he's kinda like the sassy gay guy, but the sassy gay guy is a real guy. I've met him, and also, that's only one facet of his personality. Paul Mitri, who played Trevor, and Paul Morgan Stetler, who played Curtis, legitimately have some pretty great on-screen chemistry.
I don't think so. Your wild social life's just a little too fast for me.
Tipper Gore's social life is too fast for you.
The way they pal around, roasting each other and showing interest in one another's lives, it's very believable.
Shame on you.
Shame isn't part of my vocabulary.
Well, it must be. You just said it.
See what happens when you waste a good line on a straight point?
Whereas Gabriel and Von Glauer felt like two people getting to know each other, Curtis and Trevor feel thick as thieves, as though they've been through some shit together and have each other's backs. You can tell from their brief interactions that Trevor is not a fair-weather friend. This dynamic really helps bring life to Phantasmagoria too. So many of the interactions in these games feel stiff and awkward, and in a game with such dark subject matter, having this very real friendship provides a much-needed contrast, an oasis in the desert. Look, it's not like having a normal gay character was a massive breakthrough in '96, but consider the immediate competition here.
Cross your fingers. I'm going to make everyone matching mauve pillow cozies. Stop it, you're messing me up!
With Curtis's morals and grip on reality loosening, he agrees to meet Teresa, horny Teresa, at a BDSM club in the city. Excuse me, is this the sex club?
We'll clean up the town. We'll turn that old brown upside down.
Oh yeah, this is the place. Here, Curtis gets his navel pierced and then has animalistic intercourse with Teresa in the club bathroom.
Are you winning? Oh, no.
A spirit of raw savagery seems to have taken hold of Curtis, and that spells trouble. The next day, Curtis collapses at work, and when he awakens, he finds himself in an asylum.
Fruit Loops and Cheerios! Pizza! Yeah! That's my Barbie doll! Tasty bits of oats and chewy. Give me the Cheeto. I got you. That's my taco salad.
So this actor is clearly improvising after the director told him, okay, you're in an asylum. Just act like a crazy person, all right? Give us a bunch of crazy lines. And the only thing he could think to do was yell the names of food.
Nurse.
Come on, everybody.
Nurse, what am I doing? Why am I here? I don't belong here.
Shut up, wacko.
You're in the asylum of hard knocks now, bitch. The entire asylum section turns out to be yet another dream, and it's around this point that the story of Phantasmagoria 2 starts going off the rails a little bit. Curtis's immediate boss, Tom, is murdered as well. As a matter of fact, several people start getting picked off, including Teresa. Obviously, Curtis is a prime suspect for both the police and the player. It's not clear to Curtis himself whether or not he's behind the killings.
This mirror reflects a haunting image of me.
Not even Trevor can cheer him up. He's got his own problems.
Aren't you worried about your tiny waistline there? Just drowning my sorrows, bud.
With a malted? Who do you think you are, Jughead? He does give Curtis some sage advice at least.
I think you need to get out of town for a while. I mean, you're obviously freaked by everything that's happened, and Curtis, I know that cop has you down as a suspect.
Leaving town as a murder suspect in order to make myself look less guilty? Trevor, you're a genius. This isn't a particularly novel setup for a mystery. Man with holes in his memory questions whether or not he's responsible for killings. Descent into madness, questions of identity. That's interesting enough, and there are some opportunities to take it to a unique place. This is where a puzzle of flesh just falls apart at the seams. Wintech, you know, the pharmaceutical company whose offices look like they've been retrofitted over top of a small-town community center, Wintech has apparently been conducting top-secret research into the existence of alternate dimensions in what they call Project Threshold. Also, there's aliens involved. Curtis's father helped spearhead this project, whose members used unethical means to conduct research, such as with the use of unwilling test subjects from an asylum. As Curtis learns more, he finds that he himself was a test subject given to Wintech by his father. If this company is a front for extra-dimensional research, they're doing a terrible job. Extremely delicate information is always just sitting around on people's desks begging to be discovered by Curtis. Sensitive documents are just packed into a crawl space that pretty much anybody could get into. It's presented in such a ridiculous way. The emails and letters talking about this project are like straight from an Ed Wood movie or This Island Earth. Apparently aliens from this alternate dimension can synthesize chemicals in exchange for human lives. The big boss of Wintech, who has had very little screen time up till this point, is revealed to be a terrible villain who must be stopped. The entire Wintech plotline, for as much of a tonal shift as it is, strangely lacks a presence for much of the game. Most of the foreshadowing comes in the form of notes or emails. They just kind of sandwich these big revelations in between the murders. Now, I understand, being a suspect of the police is a more pressing matter, but the way they prime you as if to say, okay, get ready, this dimensional stuff is going to be a really big part of the story soon, without actually really tying it into the story, it feels very clumsy. It seems to me they came up with the idea of the murder mystery first and then sort of layered the Wintech stuff over top of it. Curtis's therapist is killed and then Trevor shortly afterwards.
No! Not Trevor!
Well, there goes my ability to give a shit about what happens here. There's an urgency to get to the bottom of the Wintech mystery, and from here on out, the Wintech stuff just dominates the game. Fair enough, it's not like there's many people left for Curtis to interact with. But in doing this, Phantasmagoria 2 kind of abandons itself. Everything it's built up to, the internal conflicts, the interpersonal drama, the psychosexual pressure cooker that Curtis finds himself in, it's all shoved into a little box and then shipped far, far away to make room for space aliens. John Carpenter proves that you can combine the metaphysical and extra-dimensional with an immediate character-driven plot and get the best of both worlds. The thing is, it's really hard to do that because a lot of horror concepts are actually right on the precipice of silly, and it's hard to guide the viewer or player's thinking in a way that suspends their disbelief. When I saw the movie Hereditary in theaters, during the ending, I was pretty disturbed. Some people in the theater were gasping, some were actually crying, but weirdly enough, there was more than a couple people laughing. I thought that was strange at the time, but in retrospect it makes sense. Some people are sensitive and able to put themselves in the shoes of others more easily. If somebody floated towards you in real life, you'd likely be pretty freaked out, but me describing it, it's just kind of a funny image. Some people have a heightened and constant awareness that they're watching a movie, so things that are absurd or unsettling don't affect them in the same way. They might appear kind of silly instead. Such a polarizing reaction is an extreme example, but it highlights what I'm trying to say. The suspension of a viewer's disbelief is a critical component in taking stories to weird and otherworldly places. Even though The Giant Claw and War of the Worlds are both 50s science fiction films about alien invasions, The Giant Claw was relentlessly mocked even in its time, while War of the Worlds scared the piss out of people. Neither concept is more or less absurd than the other, but War of the Worlds earns its reaction. The film carefully prepares and constructs its premise before shit hits the fan, giving you a chance to become immersed. By the time the crazy thing is happening, you're ideally willing to go along with its premise. This is Phantasmagoria 2's problem. I don't believe that Wintech is this kind of place. I don't believe that Warner is this kind of guy. I don't believe that they're capable of keeping so many complex conspiracies under wraps. Look at their offices. Look at them. I just don't believe any of it, so what should be gut-wrenching revelations are just funny, which kind of retroactively cheapens the story. Let me explain what I mean. The big boss Warner catches Curtis sneaking around the Wintech basement and gets ready to dispose of him. Maybe you shouldn't make it so easy to get into the basement if there's so many dark secrets around here. At least have a security camera or like a single guard. Then, at the last minute, an alien calling itself Curtis Craig shows up to save Curtis Craig from Warner, but only because Curtis wants to kill Curtis.
So that I can smash you, destroy you, take your life the way you took mine.
Curtis jumps into an alien portal and finds himself in 3D Renderland. Here, Curtis finds out that he's actually an alien facsimile of the real Curtis Craig, who's been trapped within the alternate dimension. This Curtis has basically been astral projecting himself to murder all of fake Curtis's friends, hoping to drive him mad, at which point he would somehow use the madness to take over the fake Curtis's body, thus becoming the real fake Curtis. Please stand up once again. Fools Curtis kills real Curtis, combines a bunch of slime to fix an H.R. Giger pinball machine. This puzzle is probably the worst one in the entire video, by the way, but I don't feel like belaboring the point here. And teleports back to the human dimension, knowing that the murderer is gone for good. From here, you can choose to have fake Curtis travel back to the alien dimension to live out the rest of his days in the flesh cavern where he belongs, or he can stay in the human dimension and be with Jocelyn. This is kind of painted as a happy ending, although with the real Curtis, who was basically a child slave, dead along with everyone in Curtis's life, minus Jocelyn, it doesn't feel as sweet as they try to make it seem. There's so many unresolved points of tension in Curtis's life, and they're just not mentioned, so I'd say it's lacking for closure. What initially appears to be an overextended but admirable attempt to tackle themes of trauma, child abuse, repressed sexuality, and many other pretty heavy subjects rapidly devolves into a B-movie that doesn't feel like it knows where it's going or what it's doing. It seems like they were pursuing something cockamamie in an effort to take you on a wild and unexpected journey, but moved past the point of no return in terms of goofiness. Once that suspension of disbelief was broken, I could only really enjoy this game on an ironic level. I really do think the game has positive qualities. Some of the acting is surprisingly good, and the interactions between characters are enjoyable. The music is atmospheric, and there's this raw industrial vibe in much of the game that I appreciated. It teleports you right back to the mid-90s when it was developed, and has a really unique identity, even compared to its predecessor. Seeing Curtis unleash his inner freak after being stuffed into a cubicle for so long shows a lot of promise. It was a risky sequel, and I do respect that. But man, it does not stick the landing. Phantasmagoria 1 has a similarly ridiculous ending that elicited more laughter than fear or genuine intrigue, so why don't I feel the same way about it? Well, I guess it's because A Puzzle of Flesh had so much more potential. The first game makes no bones about its goal and inspirations. It is an over-the-top, low-budget horror movie in video game form. The characters stay one-dimensional, the plot stays predictable, and the game never really seems to be saying anything. The sequel positions itself as a big step forward. It comes across as a little cheesy, yes, as is inherent in a 90s FMV game. But it's also more cerebral, twisted. It feels like it has a voice of its own. But that voice just does not carry to the epilogue. With the freshness of FMV having long worn off, Phantasmagoria 2 really needed to have some great puzzles, but sadly, it does not. The game design is very non-interactive and mostly just sort of annoying. Releasing the same year as games like Broken Sword and The Neverhood, that's a difficult sin to forgive. Puzzle of Flesh remains a curiosity, a game with a real vision, but also suffering from nearsightedness. A work stuffed with interesting ideas and nowhere to put them. If I want to play a game starring a psychologically disturbed man who's accused of a murder he may or may not have committed and is surrounded by seemingly supernatural happenings which culminates in the discovery of an alien conspiracy that's thwarted through the use of their own machinery following the defeat of the protagonist's dark reflection, I'll just play Darkseid 2.
Say, Hank, do you think you can get me a cherry ice cream soda?
Actually, no. No, I won't.
Phantasmagoria 2. You know, for all my misgivings, the game really has found an audience over the years. And it makes sense. If you can look past the gameplay, and there's always people who can, there's a lot of interesting things going on here. Even when the game is buckling under the weight of its own scattershot approach to storytelling, there's still entertainment value to be found. However, business is business, and finding an audience 30 years later didn't help the Sierra of 1996. It seemed the company had bet on the wrong horse with the construction of their very expensive soundstage, which would now be relegated to a space where they would do 3D scans for other games.
It was perhaps indicative of FMV's fate. The Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64 had released in the years prior. Full motion video had one foot out the door, and texture-mapped polygons were about to make their grand entrance.
Outside of Sierra, there were still a few studios who saw the value and potential in FMV. Some companies relied on it more heavily. Well, this next game we're talking about used it sparingly, more as a tool to assist with storytelling rather than the predominant aesthetic of the whole game. Pulse Entertainment's Bad Mojo is unabashedly weird. This 1996 adventure game is hard to describe because it doesn't take its cues from anything else.
We join our main character, Roger Sams, a tenant living in the upstairs room of a dive called Eddie's Bar.
I was no longer the victim. This time, I was in control.
Roger is a big-time loser who's decided to change his fortunes in life by any means necessary. He's stolen $1 million from his employer and plans to flee to Mexico in the morning. However, the landlord Eddie just won't stop pestering him.
Your rent's 3 days late. I'll take it now.
Don't push me, old man. I said you'll get it in the morning.
Looks like you're packing up for a trip. It's an awful lot of money to have laying around in this neighborhood. And your door's open. Maybe next time, you might want to lock it, huh?
I already love this game.
With Eddie out of the picture, Roger suddenly remembers the locket.
The locket?
He picks up the mysterious locket given to him by his late mother. Roger is then transformed into a cockroach, and the game begins. The premise of Bad Mojo is that you play as Roger Roach. Cock Roger? No, Roger Roach is better. You play as a cockroach navigating this foul apartment building, trying to discover a way back into Roger's body, and discovering a little bit about humanity in the process. The gameplay here is bizarre. Some of the early screens are a simple matter of navigating flat concrete floors, but soon you'll be presented with problems to solve. A rat caught in a trap appears to be dead, but you'll learn quickly that nothing in Bad Mojo is quite as it seems. A spider prepares to pounce on you, giving you only a short window to devise a plan and execute. Certain objects, such as the still burning remains of a cigarette butt, can be rotated and moved, giving you an opportunity for self-defense against the predators you find yourself face to face with now. That's kind of the crux of Bad Mojo. It's a combination of exploring these pre-rendered screens while also uncovering solutions to puzzles and solving time-sensitive problems. It's a premise that's deceptively complex due to your limitations as a cockroach. You move about the world using tank controls, and there's not much to think about control-wise aside from that. Rather, Bad Mojo asks you to alter your thinking. You may wonder, how am I supposed to descend from the wall to the bathroom floor here? Well, think like a roach. Crawl into the paper towel dispenser via a screw hole, loosen the dispensing mechanism by moving a latch, then be welcomed via the proverbial red carpet. Glue on countertops, fly paper, a stovetop covered in bubbling chili. Dealing with these obstacles often requires a thoughtful solution. Some threats are more existential. A huge rat living in your walls prevents progress, forcing you to get creative with some of the toiletries you find above his home. A vacuum cleaner left on can only be stopped by shorting out its wall cable. This is what makes the act of just walking around the game world so unique. Cracks in walls, holes where knobs used to be, and plumbing fixtures in a state of disrepair all represent opportunities. What would normally be unremarkable clutter in the environment becomes your lifeline, like half a peanut shell acting as a sailboat, carrying you to parts unknown. One particularly unique feature here is how movement works. The developers of Bad Mojo had a veritable insect farm to use as a study tool. They closely watched how the movement of roaches and spiders worked, then replicated that locomotion with the in-game renders. In fact, they rendered hundreds of different frames of our main cockroach for every possible position it could be in, to the point where it's ostensibly a 3D model, even though it's not. Moving over small obstacles such as cables, you can see the changing depth of the roach relative to the camera, and even the angle it's standing at as well. This means despite the fact that the game is made up of 2D renders, your movement capabilities are 3-dimensional. You can crawl around the edge of tables and underneath them, up the sides of walls, on the backs of desks and furniture. You can move in so many different directions that it can often be disorienting, like moving around as a cockroach would be, I suppose. It can be difficult to get your bearings when you're exploring a big room with lots of vertical movement options. Still, I'm very impressed with how freeform and realistic the cockroach movement is to this day. It's a very convincing simulation that's just arcadey enough to be fun and approachable. The aesthetics of Bad Mojo are absolutely critical to the experience and perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the game. What we have here is a combination of full-motion video cutscenes with real-life actors, pre-rendered 3D backgrounds and objects, as well as edited photographs. The apartments of Roger and Eddie feel disgusting. This grungy, foul atmosphere permeates almost every screen in the game. The perspective of an insect only enhances this feeling. What would normally be a sad look into the life of someone who's altogether given up is now this hazardous tomb full of abandoned dreams and regrets. This kind of hyper-realistic style feels integral to the experience of Bad Mojo. The grainy textures of the surfaces you walk across feel dirty, disgusting, forgotten. You feel a sense of despair moving across a filthy kitchen counter, from the glistening flesh of a fish choking on air to the ash of cigarettes sitting next to maggot-infested chunks of rotting meat. You feel everything in Bad Mojo, the blood, the rust, and the mildew. With each new screen, I just couldn't shake the need to go wash my hands. At the same time, there is a strange beauty in Bad Mojo. Each render in the game, of which there are hundreds, is composed with such intention. The level of detail in objects is far greater than the average render quality at this time. There's frequently some really clever camera work and angles used here, giving you a vantage point over your surroundings, sometimes to intimidating ends. The use of color and contrast, not only to create a variety of moods, but also signal transitions between areas, is very clever. Your eyes are drawn to these natural focal points. The objects you interact with wouldn't be noteworthy under other circumstances, but somehow the developers knew how to compose scenes in such a way that the player can intuitively understand what the puzzle is and where the solution might be found. That's pretty thoughtful design for the one and only game by a studio you probably have never heard of before. The designer of the game, Drew Huffman, was inspired by his own experiences growing up dealing with roach infestations. He was interested in the idea of taking the mundane world we live in and appreciating it from the eyes of something 1/100th of the size. There is something amusing about seeing a cockroach trudge through a leftover TV dinner and understanding that it's on an epic journey. Now, I have to admit, I'm a sucker for games where you navigate mundane environments from the perspective of something small. Toy Commander, Army Men, Toy Story 2. Oh, these are all toy games. There's got to be a bug game. Mr. Mosquito? Didn't think I'd ever reference that one on this channel. I've always liked the idea of turning kitchens and bathrooms into battlegrounds. Bad Mojo has a very unique take on this concept and goes in such a dark and moody direction with it. Hell may not be found in a dingy apartment, but it's pretty damn close. A huge component of the atmosphere is found in the game's soundtrack. This music, composed by Peter Stone, better known as Exorcist, is just as pungent as the game's visuals. There's a big variety of tracks in this game, most of them unique to their respective area, and they establish the atmosphere and downcast vibes perfectly. A countertop feels like an apocalyptic war zone, the bathroom like a den of disease. The music feels like the perpetual drunken haze of Eddie, the owner of the bar, confused, broken, and hopeless. Even some of the upbeat tracks are just so weird. Odd instrument choices, eerie melodies, plodding synths. This is one of the most surprisingly creative and fitting soundtracks I've heard in a game, and Bad Mojo greatly benefits from it. Unlike a lot of adventure games, there's often an imminent danger of death on each screen. As you make your way through the building, you'll be frequently scanning each new area. What would usually be negligible is often fatal in Bad Mojo. Given that there is some trial and error here, including a timed section, which I'm generally not a fan of, you're definitely encouraged to save often. The puzzles in this game are pretty great. As mentioned, most of them have something to do with exerting what little influence a roach would have to navigate the environment. Although the designers were fans of Myst, they wanted to approach Bad Mojo differently. Puzzles in most cases could be clearly delineated from the more exploratory parts of a game. This made it obvious when it was puzzle time, basically acting as hard gates for progress. With Bad Mojo, they wanted the puzzles to be more naturally intertwined with the world. This would leave some ambiguity as to what's considered a puzzle versus what would simply be navigating the environment. Not only does this approach work well here, but it's actually a crucial part of Bad Mojo's identity. Without stopping and thinking about it, it's not even obvious that you're playing an adventure game or solving puzzles, even though that's exactly what you're doing. As far as the player is concerned, they're simply moving forward by looking for and creating pathways. For example, at one point you'll have to find and rescue a baby roach. With it riding upon your back, you'll have enough weight to shift an object, giving you a bridge. In order to get past a hungry cat, you have to goad it into swatting at you in a specific place, causing a vivarium to crash onto the floor, scaring it away. It's not about grabbing and combining items or putting up a fight, it's about utilizing the world around you to your own ends. There are some minor frustrations here. It's sometimes unclear which parts of the game world can be manipulated and what parts of the screen can be moved on top of or through. This leads to a lot of moments where you'll just have to crash Roger into every object you see without knowing what it is or what it'll do. There's also that element of trial and error I'd mentioned before. It's sometimes impossible to account for hazards without knowing that they're coming. It's a minor annoyance, but again, as long as you're okay with save scumming, this isn't too big a deal. Some of the puzzles are a little more esoteric, but nothing is so out there that you'll be stumped. Most of the roadblocks I came across in Bad Mojo were strictly related to navigation, just not knowing where to go or what furniture can be crawled on to reveal new screens. That is a little annoying to be sure, but Bad Mojo avoids the worst trappings of adventure games. Overall, I'd say that the puzzles here are quite well designed and really cleverly implemented in a way that you didn't and still don't often see in adventure games. The story and characters have a surprisingly large presence in Bad Mojo. The game is very loosely based on Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. This was back when making something Kafkaesque was still cool. Obviously, Roger Sams is the Gregor Samsa of the story, and yes, his name is an anagram for Gregor Samsa. Bad Mojo is Roger's Dark Night of the Soul. The locket from the intro contains a photo of Roger's mother, who frequently acts as his guide in these FMV sequences.
A great fire burns in the cellar of your heart. Be careful and wary of your noxious intent.
She tells Roger that this form is a vehicle through which he must learn painful truths about himself and others. These sections with Roger's mother use imagery from the game to deliver lessons on the nature of fear, hope, and love. While traveling through the apartments of Roger and Eddie, you'll find yourself confronted by the pasts and presents of both men. Eddie, in particular, is more of a tragic figure than you might have given him credit for. He's a poverty-stricken alcoholic, driven to this point by grief over his deceased wife. While the game certainly makes an effort to show just how reprehensible Eddie is in the beginning, your perception of him softens as you retrace the steps of his life and learn just what it is that brought him to this hopeless point. I don't know if it would be accurate to say that Bad Mojo uses environmental storytelling, because the entire game kind of is environmental storytelling. Every frame tells a tale of its own, some of which you partake in. For the most part, though, you're left to piece together an event that once occurred. Something as insignificant as gum stuck under a table becomes a monument to the slothful nature of humanity. Occasionally, you'll come across other roaches. Whereas humans, we'd look at them with disgust, here we see them as kindred spirits embarking on epic journeys of their own. You begin to establish connections between our protagonist and the landlord as Roger learns of the surprising ways in which he's bound to Eddie. The acting, while absolutely theatrical and over the top, is perfectly in tune with Bad Mojo as a game. These guys just embody Roger and Eddie as characters. As much as Roger's mother waxes philosophical, the story here never really transcends beyond an enjoyable excuse to go walk around stinky box springs for a few hours. The game also features 4 distinct endings. This is only affected by the final stretch of the game, so it's easy enough to reload a save to see each one. One ending in particular is surprisingly touching, even in its insincerity. Supposedly, Bad Mojo had a difficult production. If this is so, then it's hard to imagine that this misery doesn't come through in the game itself. It's a peculiar game, to say the least, and one that's hard to believe was released in '96. In fact, the game did surprisingly well sales-wise, despite its niche subject matter and unapproachable style. Bad Mojo is awesome. The originality of the concept is one thing, but the commitment to that concept is downright admirable. I think it takes a certain degree of vision to see a bug crawling across the floor and think, yeah, this is an idea worth pursuing, in a world dominated by Mario and Pokemon. It's creative, weird, and oddly realistic, but still a palatable and enjoyable experience. That's largely because of the presentation. This game looks and sounds like the life of a lonely, despondent individual. It's a suffocating world, even in its massive scale, radiating this constant feeling of unease. Without leaning on tired genre tropes, Pulse managed to create something truly cohesive. Each individual part of Bad Mojo contributes to the experience. The controls, the visuals, the music, the puzzles, the pieces of this game rely on each other to frame the hellscape that is this ordinary apartment building. Bad Mojo sits atop a throne of tetanus and food poisoning, and if you have the stomach for it, it's well worth a try. There's just nothing quite like it.
So games like Bad Mojo relied on FMV and live actors as a supplemental storytelling device rather than the overarching design of the whole game. It seemed like if live actors had any place in the coming age of gaming, it would be there, in the background.
So what?
It was becoming obvious that cinematic direction and even the use of actors could be implemented without the use of FMV. The low level of interactivity and the low resolution video playback, it was just clear this wasn't what gamers wanted. Seldom is a technology adopted with such high hopes dropped with such extreme prejudice, and so quickly too. It was literally 3 years ago that magazines were praising Night Trap as a glimpse into the future, and already it had become a huge joke.
With games requiring increasingly long development cycles, there would be a few stragglers committed to FMV. Some games, such as the sequels to Myst and its many clones, would avoid the customary FMV cheesiness by utilizing pre-rendered visuals only. Others would squeeze through the rapidly closing door of FMV relevancy through sheer force of charm and mechanical soundness. Some found themselves in an awkward middle ground.
Hi, Mom.
Oh, Mike, I can't talk to you anymore. You're just too depressing.
Extremely awkward, so fucking awkward. One such game is a game that I've already discussed on this channel. But hey, I'll take any excuse I can to replay it. We can't close off a video about FMV horror with real-life actors without at least briefly discussing DigiFX Interactive's Harvester. Harvester is a point-and-click adventure game of no small renown, at least today. For years, the game flew under the radar, not known by many, but beloved by few. And that's because it's the archetypal oddball. Harvester, for how conventional its gameplay may be, is wrapped inside of a package that just defies back-of-the-box description. In Harvester, you play as Steve, certified kidder.
Well, you always were a kidder, Steve.
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 I've heard that harvest is lovely in the fall when the leaves turn orange and gold, and the annual blood drive paints the town red.
Steve wakes up one day with no memory of who he is, where he is, or how he got there. The who, unfortunately, is Steve. The where is the small town of Harvest. And the how represents the central mystery of Harvester. You quickly become aware that Harvest is not the kind of town one wants to stay for long periods of time. Nearly everyone in town, from Steve's mother to the paper boy to the chief of police, seem, how should I put it, off. Only one person aside from Steve seems to have their head screwed on right, and that's Stephanie Potsdam. And she has sex with Steve, so even that's up for debate. Stephanie, like Steve, has lost her memory. Apparently, she and Steve are engaged to be married in 2 weeks.
I can't marry someone I don't even know.
With Stephanie grounded by her father and mother, who is just Steve's mother but wearing a wig, it's up to Steve to discover the secrets of Harvest and learn just what the hell is going on. In the very center of Harvest is the Lodge, the headquarters of a secret society called the Order of the Harvest Moon. Despite not knowing what goes on behind their closed doors, the people of Harvest have only positive feelings about the Lodge and encourage Steve to join as soon as possible. All roads lead to the Lodge. Now, in order to join the Lodge, Steve has to engage in some shenanigans, as dictated by the Sergeant at Arms.
You will steal a bolt of fabric from the fireman and bring it to me.
While these tasks begin as a series of straightforward pranks, Steve's instructions become increasingly gruesome and depraved. Will Steve uncover the secrets of Harvest? And if he does, will he lose his soul in the process? The gameplay is centered around those tasks Steve must perform to enter the Lodge. It's here where you'll find the bulk of the game's puzzles. Now, it's quite possibly because I played the game just a few years ago, so it's still kind of fresh in my mind, but I felt a bit less negative about the puzzles this time around. They seemed slightly less obtuse than I remembered, although there still are some stinkers here. The game doesn't allow you to progress until you've completed all necessary tasks for the day, so thankfully there's no classic Sierra dead ends here.
After all this time. Where's my application, Boyle?
Still, you've got puzzles like scratching Mr. Johnson's Tucker. His garage is right there, but the solution to your problem is here. Looping up this manhole lifting key on the other end of town, then bringing it over to lift this manhole, which has a secret tunnel to the Tucker, it's not exactly intuitive. Like many of the other games we've talked about today, Harvester involves quite a bit of pixel hunting as well. There are many objects in the foreground and background here, so it's a little annoying to click on every one waiting to see if you could pick it up. One of Harvester's more enduring assets would be its aesthetics. First and foremost, it's no secret that this game is soaked in a pretty healthy dose of ultra-violence.
I appreciate your honesty, comrade.
Most of this violence looks pretty silly, a combination of digital and practical special effects. More often than not, they look pretty low rent, but there's a few moments that make me wince just a little bit. However convincing it is, the violence is a critical piece of Harvester's identity. Underneath the niceties of Harvest is the blood-spattered, subterranean reality, a side of town that the player and Steve gradually uncover, and who knows, maybe the two of you even start to enjoy it. The director Gilbert Austin wanted to use the player's experience to address the growing cultural concern regarding violence in media.
But should violence be treated as entertainment?
Check my rating, son. Violence is entertainment. I just put it on the air. If some kid watches, that says something about the kid, not me.
When your time with Harvester comes to a close, will you be disgusted with yourself, or have you become desensitized? If you weren't already, of course. As such, the game wears its blood-soaked heart on its sleeve. From the mystery meat at the local meat factory, it's cats, they're eating cats, to witnessing Harvest's idea of student discipline.
If an A-bomb hits, what good is it gonna do to duck and cover?
For the people of Harvest, violence is as American as apple pie, and for the player, whether as a witness or a participant, it's unavoidable.
Oh, shit! Ow! Shit on a stickeroo!
Now the game's look could be described as gaudy, you might even say it's kind of ugly, but the visuals hit in some kind of way that few other point-and-click games do. This combination of live actors and 3D pre-rendered backgrounds, it's not uncommon, but the streets of Harvest just ooze atmosphere. Your eyes are drawn towards the unnatural. When something doesn't wash with your conception of reality, it sets off alarm bells in your subconscious. When the entire game world is unnatural, but the people within it are still recognizable as real human beings, it sends you straight into the uncanny valley. That's only heightened by the low resolution of the graphics, the quirks of mid-90s 3D rendering technology, and the odd music. Blending the digital with the real creates a sort of spatial incongruence. You're aware that these aren't real locations, but they're close to feeling real. Harvester takes advantage of this in a big way. The game is at its most unsettling when the town of Harvest is at its most mundane, when there's only subtle hints about what goes on underneath the facade. When the game blows its load and shows you some gratuitous violence, that's when it gets real silly. When the game is at its most restrained, when it's actively trying its best to be normal around you, that's when you feel like you're in the presence of a facsimile. I think the brain is unsettled by that in a way that's hard to reduce and explain. That's why some FMV games are more captivating now than when they were actually relevant. Once the novelty of playable movies wore off, the actual aesthetic sum of these games' parts was laid bare, and there's nothing quite like it. In the case of a game like Harvester, there's a peculiar sense of continuation I feel when I wander around the streets of this town. Again, this relates to that approximation of realism that games like this achieve. These dreamlike environments were rendered in a modeling program, so this was at least at one time an environment that could be explored, the objects within it manipulated. Looking at the skyline in the distance or the buildings in town, you have the urge to explore, yet you're restricted. The smoke and mirrors of pre-rendering imprisons you. You will see what the designers want you to see. Like Steve, you have a longing to move about freely, but you're trapped. That's where some of this unsettling vibe comes from. You want to logic your way through these spaces that aren't bound by logic. These are photographs of fake 3D likenesses of real places, of fake within a fake. Perfect for enhancing the vibe of a game like Harvester, where nothing is as it seems, and a reason why it wouldn't have worked in real-time 3D. The people of Harvest are digitized images of real-life actors, whose dialogue is then voice-acted. I don't know where they found these people, but they are just putting every ounce of heart and soul they have into this game's script.
Colonel Buster Monroe, commander of the Harvest Nuclear Missile Installation. keeping America safe from those who would dye our flag red, white, and pink.
These are nuclear missiles?
Goddamn right they are.
You'll get frequent cuts to FMV sequences, sometimes for no real reason.
It takes dedication and a strong stomach. A lot of times when I'm...
Why did that need to be an FMV? What did that add to the scene? Yet somehow these clumsy cuts and awkward transitions in and out of dialogue are just Harvester to a T. It's charming buffoonery. Harvester is one of the few games where I think comparisons to Twin Peaks are actually warranted. Not because the town of Harvest emulates the town of Twin Peaks, but because both towns are characterized by the oddness of the people inside of them. When writing weird characters, it's not uncommon to go a little overboard and end up with some lol-so-random XD dialogue that comes across as insincere. When everything is weird, nothing is weird. What Harvester shares in common with Twin Peaks is that the characters all have their own quirks and they're totally played straight. What differentiates Harvester is that rather than celebrating the mundane or attempting to spark joy, it is deliberately trying to make you feel uncomfortable from the beginning until the end. The people you talk to seldom immediately show their cards. They speak to Steve in a friendly tone of voice as though they know him well, but there's always something underneath their words that keeps you on edge. Something about their understanding of the world that doesn't jive with your own, or the way they talk about certain things. There's just something fundamentally wrong with the minds of these townspeople, and not being able to point out precisely what that is only deepens the discomfort you feel while speaking to them. Imagine an entire town where people talk like they're on LinkedIn. That's about the same level of weirdness we're talking about. This uncanny feeling is contrasted by comedy. This is a funny game, often in ways that make me disappointed in myself. It's also deliberately offensive in a way that's meant to provoke a certain reaction from the player. One of the first interactions you'll have in the game is with Steve's little brother, Hank. He's watching a TV show that depicts a cowboy named Range Rider gruesomely killing Native Americans. When Steve shows shock and displeasure at the sight of this show, Hank tattles on Steve for saying the word hell, which gets him in trouble with his mom.
Mom, Steve said hell.
Young man, don't you dare use that kind of language in this house.
How'd you like that?
The people of Harvest are meant to be caricatures, funhouse mirrors reflecting American values and stereotypes in an outrageous way. Grisly violence is celebrated, but sex is talked about in hushed tones of disgust. The Parent-Teacher Association throws a bake sale to raise money for funerals for the homeless, but don't have any interest in providing them with shelters so they don't die in the first place. We're asked to please think of the children, but when a child is abducted, abused, and buried alive by Mr. Potsdam, everyone in town turns a blind eye.
Okay, Weisenheimer, even if he is a child molester, a kidnapper, and an attempted murderer, that's no reflection on what kind of father-in-law he'll be. I just can't wait for the wedding. Can you?
It's supposed to be a thinking man's game, unwrapping the absurdity to spot the irony. Its messages, however, are frequently muddled amidst the insanity. This becomes clearer towards the end of the game. Whether or not the moral of the story is meant to be ambiguous, I couldn't quite understand just what it is that Harvester was trying to say. By the time you reach the lodge, the game's previously clever and sardonic dialogue played straight devolves into room after room of self-aware, incoherent moralizing. When Harvester is just doing its thing, it gets the noggin jogging, but when it tries to get heady, it feels like it's stumbling over its own messages. I'm noticing a pattern in some of the games we've talked about today, and I'm not just talking about the fact that FMV point-and-click protagonists stand weird. What is with that? These games often have an even-keeled first few acts followed by a completely bonkers final act. Harvester is the poster child of this, with the Lodge giving up any pretense of tactful adventure game design in favor of pure digital lunacy. I have mixed feelings about the Lodge. I had mixed feelings about it the first time I played, and I have mixed feelings about it now. On one hand, I can't deny that it's a complete roller coaster ride. They got pretty damn creative with some of the environments and characters you meet here. You walk through museums full of living art pieces.
I love you, Father.
Fleshy caverns and pool halls with skeleton monsters. If you've ever taken a road trip down the Trans-Canada Highway, you've had to use this bathroom. It's just wild. None of these rooms connect together with any kind of consistent logic. They're stitched to one another like something out of a fever dream. You'll meet people you could have sworn you've met before, and then kill them. You'll see some of the game's most disgusting and unforgettable sights. The Lodge is Harvester at its most Harvester. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Aside from the endless rambling and pontificating, you'll also be forced to deal with the worst puzzles Harvester has to offer, many of which are timed, which only makes things worse. Dependable design is thrown out the window in favor of linear pixel hunts and sequences that require you to know in advance exactly what to do and how to do it. But the puzzles aren't the worst thing. The worst thing is the combat system. Yes, Harvester has combat. It's cool that you can go around killing people for funsies. That's not a feature you'd expect in pretty well any point-and-click game, much less one that's 30 years old. Unfortunately, the methods you use to kill really drag the game down in its final hours. Combat can safely be ignored for much of the game, but not in the Lodge. Here, you've got to use every tool at your disposal to take down the many threats within. You're supposed to be able to time your attacks to knock the enemies back before they hit you, but it really doesn't work that well. It's more effective to just swing like an asshole and hope for the best. You have some guns, but ammo is limited, and remember, enemies with guns can fight back.
Excuse me, you can't come in right now. I just mopped the floor. You think just because I'm a janitor I got no pride? That's all I got to do all day is clean up after you rich bastards? Take a hike before you get hurt. All right, buddy. You asked for it.
You can find items like aspirin and bandages hidden around town to heal Steve, but there's not enough to carry you through the Lodge. You'll be save scumming like Steve's life depends on it, which is actually a compelling argument to just stop trying. Revisiting Harvester was exactly the experience I thought it would be. Most of the problems I remembered having were problems I had this time too. It's just not a particularly well-designed point-and-click adventure. The puzzles aren't very good, and the forced combat segments, they're just frustrating to tell you the truth. It's everything around this that makes Harvester such a worthwhile experience. You can accuse Harvester of many things, but you can't accuse the game of being unoriginal. It has a distinctive voice, and time seems to be vindicating this fact. The past decade has been more eventful for Harvester than its actual release. The information age has given us access to historical curiosities that once passed us by, giving us another chance to appreciate what never could have found an audience in its own time. The fact is that originality isn't always rewarded in the video game industry. It often takes time for games to roll downhill, picking up new fans who can appreciate their eccentricities while forgiving their shortcomings, and there are many, sometimes. There was probably no such thing as a good time for Harvester to drop, but the circumstances surrounding its release were downright cursed. When it began development in the early 90s, the technology powering Harvester still had some legitimacy in the game industry. If they'd finished it by 1994, there's a good chance that Harvester would have found an audience. Having such a violent game starring digitized actors that predates Phantasmagoria, it's hard to imagine that the game wouldn't be at the center of discussion, even if it were just from controversy alone. But the programming end of Harvester ended up taking much longer than anticipated, 2 full years after production work had finished. Harvester was that one guy showing up to the party at 5 AM with a 6-pack.
Okay, I'll have one last beer and a dart with you, but party's over, brother.
Too gruesome and cynical to find a wide audience, too mechanically busted to find critical praise, and too outrageous to take seriously. Against the odds, Harvester endures. It could only be the product of this narrowly defined time in PC gaming history where the future of graphics tech was uncertain and amateur game devs could follow their impulses no matter what strange avenues they were led down. Harvester is a bona fide cult classic, endlessly entertaining in spite of itself. Again, if you're interested in my full thoughts on the game, check out the video I made on Harvester a few years ago. I think it still holds up. Link in the description. The tale of FMV horror is a fascinating one. Whereas survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill have only become more appreciated over time, FMV has largely been relegated to the realm of novelty. Despite serious attempts to push FMV into the mainstream, the marriage of film and interactive media simply wasn't meant to be. Well, at least not in its current form.
You could make an argument that games like Until Dawn or Detroit Become Human are an evolution of the FMV games of yesteryear, similar in principle but tweaked in ways that perhaps better suit video games as a medium. With real-time 3D graphics, instances of player freedom can be made far less myopic. But it's just not the same, is it?
There's something about the FMV format featuring live actors that just seem to be a lightning rod for weird, edgy content and transgressive themes. In most cases, this has kept these games relevant far beyond their best before date, but why is that exactly? What is it about this format that attracted writers so ready and willing to push the envelope? Personally, I think these games just so happen to be at the right place at the right time with the right style to stick out like a sore thumb among their contemporaries. The 1980s was a time of political correctness. The MPAA was restricting what could be shown on film, Senate hearings were being held in concern of vulgar rock and roll lyrics, and the moral majority was shaping culture in any way they could. The 90s, in comparison, was just a big middle finger being waved at social norms and politeness. In the gaming world, I think this attitude more strongly dominated PC game circles, since computer games were seen as more complex and sophisticated, thus oriented towards more adult audiences. In the case of FMV games, you also had talent from outside the industry. People more interested in film and literature were being put in charge of games. This had games reaching for deeper things, trying to say bigger things, often in ways that undermined the game aspect of the games, making them somewhat unpleasant to play at times. Finally, there's the uncanny aspect, low-resolution, low-fidelity visuals featuring campy acting, grainy sound, and surreal 3D renders. The games often feel a bit guerrilla in production, coarse and amateurish, which conversely only adds to the spooky and unnatural vibe. There's something strangely compelling about these games, and if you've made it to this point in the video, then perhaps you agree.
Now I know I haven't touched upon every FMV horror game, and certainly not every FMV game tangentially related to horror.
Even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, it's Greenwich Village. Somebody must have seen him.
As far as I know, he left us with one witness, and she's feeling a little fragmented at the moment. This guy is unfucking believable.
You know, the scariest thing about the Ripper is Christopher Walken's performance. Woof. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this extended look at a very odd brand of horror, and I hope all these FMV sequences and live actors don't scare you too much. Remember, real people aren't real. They can't hurt you. Hey, have a very happy Halloween season, all right? Or any other time of year you might be watching this video at. And do remember to stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.
I just hope, Philip, that you turn out better than the last experiment. The flesh grew so uncontrollably thick and twisted, like pork butt. You look confused. Actually, you look dazed, but dazed is good. It's still early for you, Philip.
Yep, it's a spinal cord.
Is it Stephanie?
I can see a resemblance, but I can't be sure.
More pie, Sheriff?
Pie? Don't you realize what's happened?
No, all in all, I'd say this was death by natural causes.
Natural causes?
You can't live without a spinal cord, son. Nothing unnatural about that.
Your rent's 3 days late. I'll take it now.
Don't push me, old man. I said you'll get it in the morning.
Looks like you're packing up for a trip. You skipping out on me?
Yeah, I'm skipping out. Look, if I pay you now, will you get the hell out of here and leave me alone?
Sure, sweetheart. Sure, I'll leave you alone.
All right, now go back downstairs to that roach-infested hovel you call a room, and don't bother me again.
It's an awful lot of money to have laying around in this neighborhood, and your door's open. Maybe next time, you might want to lock it, huh?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's good advice, Eddie.
Because if I find out you're going through my stuff, I'll be glad to give you 72 hours in the tombs for tampering with an investigation.
Sling your shit at someone else, Magnolia. It's not my fault you can't catch this guy.
Come on.
Yeah, big one.